opinions expressed by the participants of the following program do not necessarily represent those of this station. This is your announcer, Tom McKenna, coming to you from the John DeVita recording studio at a still clandestine location on the great northwest side of Chicago. We are here once again, proud to present for your approval, edification, and entertainment our monthly conclave of historical intellectuals and just plain history buffs. Meet the Chicago Historians. And now, our creator, producer, and fearless leader, John DeVita.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, September 17th, the year 2012 or 2012. The panel today will be talking about the labor history in Chicago and Chicago's own history of labor and progress. And now, here is Tom to introduce our coordinator. Go ahead, Tom.
At this time, I'd like to introduce our coordinator, John Ryan.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Tom. Old friend. Known as Jack Ryan to some people, Red to others, and they call a lot of other names over the years. So, this, maybe we have two charter members here, Ken Little, and we have Bill Kugelman. Was there ever a two-parter before? Two-part. I know we've revisited subjects, but we never had the demand for a second part to one.
Not the demand that we've had for this one.
We got a tremendous response from our show of July 16th that we recorded on labor, and so with a demand like that, we thought we should be able to continue, and we certainly had enough material to talk about, and we could have continued for 5 hours then probably. We limited to our 2.5 hours. So we're back with the same topic to build on, and if anyone is interested in this previous show of 16th, if you go to that WindyCityHometown.com, you got the www, but forget that, just put Windy City Hometown, the W's will fill in, .com. You can pick that up on our as I said, on our July 16th. We also have on that show, in addition to our Meet the Chicago Historians, we've got John DeVita's Big Band Showcase, John DeVita's Best of Old Time Radio with Tony Arietta, and we also have like Donham Sports Show, and a lot of these shows have all their origin to the great WJJG AM 1530, whose owner and founder, Joe Gentile, the man who made his fortune selling automobiles. Chet Coppock dubbed him the Baron of Barrington. He made his fortune and he shared it with us with this radio station, which really belonged to everybody. It was like the community. It was like the old Cracker Barrel. It was like the place where you get up and express your opinion, the barber shop, whatever. And there's nothing quite like it right there today. And we're trying to continue the same tradition. If we can only get call-ins, well, we'll work on that. So, first of all, we're going with labor, and today's date, a beautiful late summer afternoon, September 17th. It's not officially autumn yet till what, Friday? Is that when we officially autumn? Mm-hmm. We'll get that autumnal solstice? Solstice. Not equinox? No, that's the wrong one.
No, it's the summer solstice and the
autumnal
equinox.
You're right. Okay. Solstice was
the day and the night are equal.
I thought solstice when you put in when you have a bad tooth or something in your mouth. But anyway, that is coming up, the equinox, and so you may be listening to us in the morning or the afternoon, or the night. Who knows? Whatever it is, happy, good day to you. Let's start. We have a large panel today. We have several guests, and we have some more probably going to be joining us while we're going in the course of the show. So we have an easygoing structure here. We'll always be able to fit them in. So we'll start off with our regular panel members, and we have ladies first.
Thank you, Jack.
Jeanette?
My name is Jeanette Frontier. Originally had a program with WJJG, and I think today you're going to enjoy our interesting topic regarding unions.
Next case. Ken Little?
Ken Little, spent 35 years as a fire alarm operator, and I'm currently teaching a class at Wright College called Chicago History, and just started last Thursdays for the next 10 weeks.
Is that where the ladies all go to find Mr. Wright?
It could be when I'm there on Thursday. Mr. Wright is present, yes.
On Thursday, too. Next case. John?
When I'm there, they say Mr. Farright is present. So.
What is that named after? Bearcat Wright, the wrestler?
Who, Wright?
Which Wright? Which
No,
Wright?
it's a name for Wilbur, not both of them, but just Wilbur. Wilbur died when he was in 1912, well, 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I think, but Orville lived to be, Orville actually flew in a jet plane. Can you believe that? In 1947. And he came to Wilbur Wright to, I don't know if he dedicated the school. The older building was on Austin and Newport in Chicago, and now it's part of the Board of Education. But yeah, it's only named for one of the Wright brothers, not both.
John?
And I'm John Escacholco, glad to be here. I too had the privilege of being with the old WJJG when John DeVito was station manager there. I do a lot of public speaking and portray historical characters, and on this September the 17th, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Constitution Day. It was on this date in 1787 that the Constitution of the United States was adopted by the convention meeting in Philadelphia, signed by George Washington, who was the presiding officer of the convention. So that document, which is the foundation of our laws and based upon the Declaration of Independence as well, was ratified on this date, Constitution Day.
Interesting. I remember people in 1980 actually 1980, the 2000 election, talking about the difference between the popular election, popular vote, and the electoral vote. Someone said, when they start this? I said, I think it was 1787. So they started this.
Yeah.
Well, did these people go to take the same civics classes or history we did? Or?
I had the opportunity with some friends of mine from college. We were all history majors. I was in Philadelphia September the 17th, 1987, when they marked the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. Had a huge parade, and so I had an opportunity to be there for that. So it's good to be with this fine panel, presided over by our impresario, Jack Ryan.
Phew.
Ooh, I
Okay.
think that's
Yeah.
a dirty word.
I have to look that one up later.
Yeah, right.
Mr. William Kugelman, sir?
I had the pleasure of spending 46 years in the Chicago Fire Department, and then was president of Local 2 for a while. I'm now president of the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago, and I also had the pleasure and the honor and the, as long as this is a labor panel, of taking 97% of the Chicago firemen and paramedics on strike in 1980, along with the male version of the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, Frank Mascari. I believe that they have a lot in common, both of those presidents. Tom?
Tom?
Tom McKenna, retired Chicago police officer for 34 years, and I am also a former member of the Steelworkers Union and a former member of the Musicians Union, and presently a member of the Chicago Police Lodge, Chicago Lodge 7 Fraternal Order of Police.
Okay. Tom is a returnee. He came back. We must be doing something right here, folks.
Well,
Next case.
and also I have to admit, you notice I use the word admit, that I have been a friend of our moderator, John Ryan, since kindergarten. I'm one of the rare people that have known him that long and actually still admit it.
Wow.
Okay. Couldn't have been that long. He didn't go to kindergarten. That's
Yeah.
the way I am today.
Is that when Sacagawea was
Yeah.
around?
His kindergarten was what? It was Matt?
Lewis and Clark introduced us.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe Mescal, next case.
My name is Joe Mescal, retired Chicago police officer, almost 34 years on the job. Also past president of Local 1975, UPIU, AFL-CIO, And we are the ones who started originally to organize our Chicago police office when nobody would give us a charter. We had an international union come from Washington, D.C. to give us a charter. And one of the persons who helped us get that charter is here today with us. And of course, we will have a lot more to talk about Bill Gibbons, William Bill Gibbons later, okay?
Mr. Gibbons, sir, are also returnee.
Well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be with everyone today. And my background is that I was president of my local union back in the early 60s and became an organizer, an international representative, eventually elected to international office as a vice president of the Paper Workers Union, PACE International Union. And I became co-director of District 7 United Steelworkers Union when I retired with about 40 years of service. So I've kind of had the opportunity to view a lot of developments and how workers have been affected both in the private sector and the public sector over the years, and it's a pleasure to be able to discuss that with all of you today.
Tom Serber?
Tom Serber. I don't know where to begin after hearing all these great stories. I grew up in Cicero. My family had been involved in unions since the Chicago Fire. My great-great-grandfather was one of the founders of the Chicago Carpenters Union. My father was a steam fitter at Campbell's Soup, which is now long gone, over on near California and
35th Street.
35th, yeah. I used to pick him up there all the time when I was a kid, when I needed a car. My uncles were tradesmen. I worked for sheet metals sheet metal. I had a card for the sheet metals. Also for the Carpenters Union, I took a leave of absence from teaching. Interesting part is my first 5 years of teaching was in Chicago, and I was involved in the first three strikes in 5 years, starting in 1969. And from there, I couldn't get certified in Chicago, so I was desperate with a family to get a job. So I ended out in Geneva. I taught Geneva High School, and then for the past 26 years, I taught in Geneva for quite a while. And then for the past 26 years, I worked as a union organizer for the Illinois Education Association, which is mostly in the suburbs, but we have locals here in the city too. Finally, I'm also vice president of the Illinois Labor History Society. I used to teach history, and I've been on the board of the Illinois Labor History Society since 1987.
Okay, Illinois Labor History Society, it sounds self-explanatory, but you want to tell...
Well, it was founded back in he's still alive. He's slowed down a little. He's 101 years old, so he's now president emeritus by Les O'Rear, Bill, and then other people like Bill Edelman. I think Ed Sadowski was in it, and a number of other people. In early 70s. We've been around since the Illinois Labor History Society has been around since the early 70s, at least. It's probably one of the most largest and most effective and well-known history societies in the United States. There's not a lot of them out there anyway, and a lot of them that are out there are just a few guys hanging together trying to get the word out. The Illinois Labor History Society, like I said, has done a lot. Holds the deed to the Haymarket Cemetery Monument. We played a major role in restoring that monument just last year. Some of you may have been out at we had a couple thousand people out, and we rededicated the monument. And Les, 100-year-old Les, was there to pull down the red banner to unveil the restored monument. We also played a major role in getting the memorial at the site of Haymarket dedicated. We participate in that. We do all kinds of things, so it's a very active group.
And that site is where now? It's right off the expressway, right?
It's on Des Plaines between Randolph and Lake. That's the one. That's the site. Mm-hmm. Okay. I always say monument. But we have the cemetery monument, and we got the. I don't know what you call it, memorial or a monument. I don't know.
I see the
sculpture.
The police officer's
sculpture. Yes. Okay.
Police officer statue is now at the new headquarters building.
Yes.
He's standing there with his hand up in the air.
Yeah.
Well, when we dedicated the monument, the president of the Chicago Federation of Police was there to speak on behalf of the
Fraternal Order Police.
I'm sorry, what?
Fraternal Order.
Fraternal Order. I'm sorry. Fraternal Order Police.
There probably is another group by that
name.
They
backed the creation of the monument too.
Interestingly, when that statue first was dedicated, critics said he looked too Irish. How about that?
Well, plus, we shouldn't forget that the reason that it was moved from the original location, the statue that is, to the courtyard of the Chicago Police Academy is someone blew it up
Twice.
twice. So that's the reason that it was moved.
And originally, it wasn't even there. It was on another location. A streetcar jumped the tracks and knocked it over. So it's been knocked over 3 or 4 times.
Those transit workers too. You got to watch them.
Yeah, yeah.
There was some conjecture that the first time it was blown off by radicals, and the second time by police when they were getting close to salary time. just conjecture, folks. Remember, disclaimer.
Hey, Jack, couldn't they make it out of rubber? You know, it would then bounce.
It's a thought.
Yeah.
It's a thought. You know.
I was there a couple of days after it was dynamited the first time, and because my dad did buying on the Fulton Street Market, which is in that general area, and I found a small scrap of metal that appeared to be from the statue. It was the same color as the statue. So I've got that. I found that laying on the ground. Apparently, after they had cleaned up, they had missed it. So I've got a small fragment of the statue in a little plastic case.
And you know, John, not to throw this off, but I just had a friend ask me if having all of these type of people around me today, if anyone knows where there's a way to get a small replica of the statue that is at the police headquarters. They call many stores.
Would the FOP store have one?
We have to check into it.
That's a good question. I've never seen one.
It's just ironic. They have a collection and they need this one piece.
You know, Jeanette,
yes.
while you're talking, I picked up, I like to go to estate sales. I picked up a beautiful color photo of the statue in its present location, framed for like $5, and it's
Really?
good size. Also, there was a coin that was minted, and I don't know exactly, maybe it's the centennial or so. Does anybody recall it? Yeah, it's about the size of a half a dollar.
Well, they did make...
It shows the memorial, the statue, and I picked it up for like $2 or
Yes.
something. It was in its own case.
For one of the
So-
last ceremonies,
Yeah.
I believe they made what we'd call fake
Yeah.
replica of that. But this is
Yeah.
a statue. Very hard
yeah,
to find.
I've never seen a statue. Yeah, yeah.
But,
I wonder if you could take a picture of it in its present location, because you can see it from the windows. But I've been into Police Academy a number of times. Yeah.
I was there.
I'm
I
sure
saw,
you
I
saw
saw it
it.
in its present.
Yeah.
May you?
Yeah,
Will they let you?
yeah, yeah.
Does anyone know the three? There may have been more, but there was an inscription. There were 3 words that the officer was supposed to be saying. Does anyone know what those 3 words were?
I command peace.
Right.
Yeah,
I command peace.
peace. Yeah, yeah. It was.
Where's my half?
Yeah. And I think it was the captain was. They always talk about Bonfield, but I think his name was Ward actually. And and I only saw the Plain Street police station once, and it was replaced around 52 or so.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
It was actually still up, huh? Still there?
It was still in use. I mean,
Was,
the first
huh?
time I saw it.
What
Yeah.
it looked like?
I saw it at night. It was a 3-story building, just sort of common, but it did have not a front porch, but it had wooden steps leading up on the sideway.
Sounds like kind of like the old 4th District might have been. They had the back where the horse-drawn wagon would come out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's very interesting when we look at the physical remembrances of things that exist from the Haymarket Square situation. But I think it's important that we remember the history surrounding it and what happened, what created it, and what lessons that we've learned from that. And even though we talk about statues and things of that nature, and there's the statue at the police headquarters, and there's a statue at the cemetery, and there's an inscription that was written on the statue at the cemetery by one of the individuals that was hung, and his name was Spies, and it's on the inscription that states that
Spies, I think, actually in
Spies.
German.
Spees, yeah.
Yeah, it's
the
all
day,
the speech.
the day
Yeah.
will come when our silence will be more powerful than the voices you are throttling today.
Yeah.
And that struggle started, and it's unfortunate it ended up the way it did, but in 1886, in May of 86, there were there was a lot of labor unrest, and that was before any of the labor laws that we have today. And it was over the 8-hour day, workers attempting to form an 8-hour workday. And that's what they wanted to do. And it began actually at the Harvester Works, McCormick Harvester, and spread out as a demonstration that was going to take place at Haymarket. And it wasn't only in that area, but also there was a lot going on in Milwaukee. There were about 7,000 Polish immigrants that have come to Milwaukee and got together to form a group because they were protesting wage cuts, wanting the 8-hour day, and workers were really struggling. So when we look at the history and what occurred and the other aspects of what occurred at Haymarket, I think it's very informative, it's educational, because so often, especially in today's environment, we forget, our society forgets what organized labor has done to create the middle class. We forget where the 8-hour day came from, for a 40-hour work week, holidays, vacations, pension plans, health care coverage, a livable wage. So, and I think those are the things that need to be emphasized as well.
That's one of the, when I talk to people, or the subject of unions or union representation comes up, I remind people, unfortunately, today it seems like it's an us against them. Unions against non-unions, non-unions against unions. And what I like to explain, just as you said, and to reinforce that fact, I remind people that whether you're a member of a union or not, whether you have ever been a member of a union, and irregardless of how you feel about unions, every benefit that you have, I can't think of one, every benefit that you have is a result of organized labor fighting for those benefits.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Well, just on the Haymarket, to just put it in a broader context, what happened was in 1886, there was a call for a general strike in the United States, and start on May Day, May 1st. The AFL, the newly formed AFL-CIO, AFL, no CIO at the time, newly formed AFL, backed this call for a general strike. And then eventually the Knights of Labor came on board. And Chicago was the center of unionism in the whole Midwest. You had New York, you had L.A. and on the West Coast, but New York was probably one of the biggest labor centers in the United States. So the strike got out maybe 500,000 or more workers across the country in places like Milwaukee, New York, and elsewhere. But the center of that strike was here in Chicago. And as you mentioned, the day before Haymarket, which the Haymarket tragedy was May 4th, on May 3rd, there was a number of workers were shot and killed by police on that day. The Captain Bonfield was really in bed with the Captain Bonfield, who you mentioned, was really in bed with the companies, McCormick Harvester and others. So he was building his reputation as beating work. That was his forte.
I think he had a nickname called a clubber.
Yeah. And so on May 4th, it was a dreary night, rainy, drizzly, and they were called for a large demonstration. A couple thousand people showed up. Mayor Carter Harrison was there observing the event. He, as the last speaker was up on the stage, Carter Harrison told Bonfield, hey, it's a peaceful demonstration, just leave it alone. Carter Harrison left, and then Bonfield decided on his own to march in there with 200 or 300 police officers to tell them to go home, and someone in the crowd, they'd never found out who, threw a bomb that killed one policeman, and then there was all kinds of shooting going on, and 7 policemen were eventually died, and they don't know how many workers, because any of the workers who got shot were dragged away, whether they were wounded or died. The families didn't want anybody to know who, because there might be retaliation. So that event led to a trial, which became an international event, and there was 7 of the 7 convicted, 7 were convicted, sentenced to death. Only a couple of them were actually there when it happened. Most of them weren't. Some of them never were there, but they were union leaders from around the city. So this became a cause celebre for labor across the world. And then a year or two later, at the Second International, called for May Day to become International Workers' Day, and that's how it never caught on in the United States, but around the world, that's where May Day came from.
Is that where we have Labor Day?
No, Labor Day came later.
Right.
No, I know, but is it why?
Well, yeah.
In response to it, May Day was celebrated by unions and socialist parties all over the world. Left
And still is.
It still is, yes.
Yeah,
It's not a Soviet event, actually.
Yeah, the problem is it was demonized because it was connected with communism.
Yeah.
And that kind of put the kibosh on the recognition of May Day, or May 1st is May Day, so it was kind of demonized to the extent that we in the United States wouldn't celebrate it. And then later on, legislation was passed creating Labor Day, but the real event, you're right, was May 1st is May Day, and the struggle was over workers' rights and the 8-hour day and all the things.
Radical idea, like an 8-hour day.
Well, and what you probably need to know
Isn't it
is
strange how things happen? We don't learn from the past, and it's happening right now in the papers here in Chicago.
Well, I'd like to follow up on what Tom said, and I'm sorry, maybe.
I just wanted to add one other thing. What people need to know when you talk about the 8-hour day, back then, if you were a skilled like in the building trades, the typical day was 10 hours, 6 days a week. If you were in a factory, it was 12 hours a day, 6, sometimes 7 hours, 7 days a week. And if you were in a sweatshop, it was 14 hours a day. Yeah. So I mean, and there were no benefits. If you got fired if you got hurt on a job, there was no insurance. All these things that people take for granted today, as one of guests here said, a panelist said, is true. That none of this stuff existed. You were on your own. And so unions became a place where you had death benefits, places where you could get at least bury your kids' family could bury their.
Didn't that exist like up to the 30s even?
Pretty much. Well, it slowly changed, but yes, until the 30s, you still had 6-day week, 10-hour days.
I mean, like the injury. If you're injured, tough, right?
Oh yeah. It was the Roosevelt. The history of the United States labor is. The history of oppression, right up until the Roosevelt administration. There were brief periods where you had some things, but basically, the United States was very oppressive.
Wait, and I gotta. When you start saying the history of the United States was the history of oppression, no. There were labor problems here, but don't forget that there were at that time millions of people coming to this country to enjoy the opportunities to get ahead. And this was a nation that granted opportunity to everybody. And that's why you had the great waves of immigration. If we were a nation of oppression, I don't think that there would have been all those immigrants coming to these shores.
I don't mean it that way.
But why don't we put things in perspective? Because I think were workers' rights oppressed? Yes, they were. I don't think there's any question about that.
That's exactly.
And that's, I think, so we have to put things in context, because there's no question that workers came here, immigrants came here for the opportunity and American dream. There's no question about that. But when the workers felt that they were suppressed and they wanted to organize, they were beaten down, they were shot, killed. There was just a lot of turmoil and terrible things that happened to workers. And it wasn't until the New Deal in 1935, when the country passed a lot of legislation, including the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act as it's called, in 1935, that workers actually started gaining the opportunity to organize as a legal right. I mean, you have to remember, prior to 1933, the legal philosophy that existed at the time is that workers didn't have a legal right to organize, and that the employer, whether the employer had a God-given right to determine what the conditions of employment were going to be for the workers. And back at that time, the public employees didn't have any rights whatsoever, weren't even on the radar screen at that time being talked about. No, this was primarily in the private sector that this was all starting to take place. And so I think we have to put things in context. But I want to just address one of the things that Tom said, because I think it's very important in today's environment and what we see happening today. And that is that I can recall, and I know Joe Mescal here, who fought like hell to organize the Chicago Police Department, and I've got to give Joe so much credit for standing up and doing something at a time when so many people didn't want to even entertain it and get involved in it. And but what's happened is the public employees were beginning to organize. There is no federal law that covers public employee collective bargaining rights. So the rights of public employees had to be established through state legislatures and through state law, not federal law. And what occurred was that was what we were confronted with is more public employees began organizing and gaining rights and negotiating benefits and higher wages and fringe benefits, and there was a trade-off at one time with public employees. It'd say, well, you may not make as much as private sector workers, but we're going to give you good benefits. We're going to give you a good pension plan. We're going to give you better insurance coverage. And then public employees began improving. What's happening today is because the workers in the private sector are really being beaten down, and as the union density in the private sector is declining, there is an exact correlation of the decline of the middle class. I mean, there's no mistake about these. These are the facts that are occurring. And so what happens, we begin to see a jealousy effect setting in. And we say, hey, why should that firefighter have a pension? I'm not getting a pension like that, and I'm paying taxes. And what about that copper? Why should a police officer get X amount, and I'm paying taxes, and I'm not getting it? So you see where there's an effort, or there's a philosophy beginning to set in of kind of pitting one group against another group, and we see some of this beginning to take hold, which is very disturbing. Why we need further educational discussions.
Right, that was exactly my point. This should not be, in the discussion of labor and unions. This should not be an us against them, and vice versa. And I can remember, we didn't have this atmosphere when I went on the job in 1968, and I remember, again, to talk about the difference between public employees and private sector employees. I remember the public employees really were way on the back burner. I can remember distinctly when I first went on the Chicago Police Department, friends of mine, the recent college graduates, that they were entering the private sector. They were making a lot more money. They even questioned, hey Tom, what do you want to be a cop for? What are you crazy? And even up like 10, 15 years after I was on, I had a friend of mine. He was a national sales manager for a medical supply company. He begged me to come and work for him. He said, Tom, I can double your salary overnight. So now progress to the economy now, and the feeling now, like I say, and I tell people this, I say, what, when I was making, and you were making a lot of money, nobody cared about us. Nobody cared about what we were making. Nobody cared about what our pensions were. So what? You had a lot of money in your IRA, but now, because the economy hit the skids, and they're out of these same people that were, bad-mouthing public employees, now that the economy is in the skids, now they turn and look, and exactly what you said, hey, what's this guy making? Look at the pension. Nobody knew what our pensions were years ago, and nobody cared.
And the other aspect that we see occurring is also a generational conflict that's developing. We see this problem between private and public sector. Now we're also seeing a generational conflict where some people are saying, well, these old people are getting Medicare and they're getting Social Security, and the young people have to pay for that, and that isn't right, and they get the young. So we see these divisions being developed that are really not healthy for our country.
Bill, who creates these divisions?
Well, I think that...
No, very simple. The politicians.
Yeah,
the politicians.
To a great extent, that's correct.
We didn't have anything, and I'm speaking from the public sector.
Right.
Public sector.
Yeah.
Illinois did not have a collective bargaining bill until 1981.
Yep.
They didn't have it until the Chicago firefighters went on strike.
Yeah.
For 23 days.
Well,
and that woke them up.
Yeah.
That woke them up, and then the police came in, and a lot of people of my people don't want to hear me say this, but God bless Jane Byrne.
Yeah, well,
She started this.
Yeah,
No, let me finish this. We had nothing. We had no overtime. We had no holiday pay. We had no working out a rank. I don't know if the coppers had that at that time or that. We had nothing like this.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was a steward for Stuart Warner. In 43, I think it was, she said, they had no union, but the unions came in to organize, and she was castigated right and left, called a lesbian and a bitch and that, and they stuck together. And when I talked to her about what we got out of the strike, I'm fourth generation on this job, so she knew. She could not believe that we didn't get overtime pay and we didn't get out of rank pay. A foreman in the Stuart Warner's got that. So it was about time.
Yeah.
And whoever's causing this right now is the politicians, and they're
you're right.
sitting back and they're laughing.
Bill, interesting you would say, up to the time that we were getting involved and you had your strike and we were organizing, my mother was a crossing guard. She started when I started high school in 1960. They had their organization. It wasn't affiliated. It did later on affiliate. They had seniority in picks. They could pick the corner by seniority. They had other that we didn't dream of. Like if you spoke of any sort of rights like that, you were like, "Are you kidding me? This is the job of clout. You get it by this job is even put out there. It's just given to friends." But they had it before we did. Later on, they affiliated with the Service Employees International Union before she retired, and of course, Ma's been almost 4 years now. She had 35 years on that job, and she said she never thought of it as being a job. It was always going to the corner. So,
My dad was.
I tell you what, here's our first contract. See how thin it is?
Yeah.
It's our first contract.
Yeah, Mr.
This is one of them now. This is from '99, and the one now is a little thicker. And I tell you what's in here, this first one, is a hell of a lot better than is in the one now, because they're taking it all away.
Yeah.
there you go.
They're taking it away.
Joe had a question for you.
Bill, you spoke about collective bargaining law, right?
Right.
Well, I recall very vividly back in the early 70s when Representative Hanahan from Rockford, who was a business agent of the Carpenters Union, who entered House Bill 2 in the state legislature. I was then trying to organize the Chicago Police Department. I couldn't get anybody, firefighters, teachers, bricklayers, I don't care who they were in the city of Chicago, they all had handshakes. They refused to come down to Springfield and help me to get that bill passed, House Bill 2 by Tom Hannon. So therefore, I operated with I helped the Chicago Fire Department. I rode up and down to Springfield with Muscari. We told him what happened during the strike. I worked during the strike. I broadcast over your radio during the strike. As a matter of fact, I helped Mr. Reddy, who took over from Kogelman, who asked me, "Joe, what do I do now?" That Kogelman Muscari had gone to jail. I said, "Continue what you're doing right now."
Yep.
But I guess we're having a break.
We have to take a short break, ladies and gentlemen.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians. We'll be back momentarily following these announcements.
Are you looking for a good place to have lunch or dinner? Well, I have just the right place for you to go, and that is Sorrento's Village Restaurant and Pizzeria, which is located at 2318 Mannheim Road in Melrose Park. Now, every Friday from 5 p.m. until 8:30 p.m., you can enjoy their all-you-can-eat buffet and pasta bar just for $11.95 for adults and $7.95 for kids 10 and under. Sorrento's is proud to introduce its Friday night buffet with pasta bar made to order, fresh pasta with your choice of vodka or 4-cheese Alfredo, marinated sauce, plus Sorrento's meatball and sausage, and a buffet that is bursting with flavors from risottos, seafood, chicken dishes, and a variety of Sorrento's pizza, and a full salad bar and garlic bread. Again, just $11.95 for adults and $7.95 for kids 10 and under. All you can eat. Also, you can enjoy their affordable, fast, perfect, full-service catering. Catering might sound expensive, but when you choose Sorrento's, you do the work and take the applause for the memorable party, showers, barbecue, block party, or use in one of our beautiful banquet rooms accommodating 20 to 200 guests and plenty of free parking. Many catering orders can even be prepared the same day or within 24 hours. Remember, for the best food in town, go to Sorrento's Village Restaurant and Pizzeria, located at 2318 Melrose Park, just south of Fullerton Avenue on the west side of the street, and there is plenty of free parking. You can call Sam or Frank at area code 847-455-9440. Sorrento's weekday lunch buffet is perfect for business get-togethers, even funeral luncheons, soups, salads, pasta, pizza, vegetable, fresh-baked bread, and meat or fish plus dessert. Call 847-455-9440 for group prices.
How about a little bit of Chicago?
And now, back to our panel in today's discussion. Jack?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. We're back now so quickly after those crass commercial messages, as one of my favorites used to hear, to say on the radio. And we're back in our discussion. If you're coming in late, is labor in Chicago, history of labor, and of course we're going to tie it in with current events. It seems very timely. So just once again, to refresh our memory, let's go around the table once more. Who's here? Bill?
Bill Gibbons. I'm a retired co-director to Steelworkers.
Jeanette Frontier, formerly with WJJG.
Tom Serber, retired union organizer for the Illinois Education Association.
Ken Little, currently teaching Chicago history at Wright College.
John Iscacholco. I was a town official in the town of Cicero and a state representative, and do a lot of lecturing, public speaking.
Bill Kugelman, Chicago Fire Department.
Tom McKenna, Chicago Police, retired.
Joe Mescal, retired Chicago police officer.
It's back to me now, gang. Jack Ryan, John Ryan, Red Ryan. What do you want to call me? Doesn't matter to me.
Late for dinner.
So
Yeah.
I believe that Tom Serber has something.
I'd like to follow up with the conversation before the break. I grew up, I said before, I grew up in Cicero. I was one of 7 kids. My father was a steam fitter at Campbell's Soup, and at the time he was the only income in the family. We owned a house, nothing fancy. We had a car, usually a used car, but it always ran. We never ran out of car. We took a vacation once a year. We had health insurance. He had a good pension. This was back in the 50s and 60s. He retired around 1970. I had a brother in 1970 who came out of the Navy. He dropped out of high school at 16, went into the Navy, got his GED, came back, worked in a factory in the late 70s, was making $13.25 an hour in a food processing plant. He has a skilled he had some skills, but it was so. How many people could raise 7 kids? Oh, by the way, I was the first one in my family to go to college, and college was real cheap then too. I went to the University of Illinois Chicago when it first opened, but those conditions don't exist anymore. When I was teaching in Geneva, we talked about public employees. When I was teaching in Geneva with a master's degree and 10 years teaching experience in the late 70s, kids would go out of high school into the factory. It wasn't even a union factory because, but Burgess Norton, they went out of high school into Burgess Norton in Geneva and were making more money than I was. And I was their teacher. So, and I don't fault them. I'm happy that they were making good money like that because work is hard. But the point is, those jobs no longer pay even $13 an hour. They're paying $10 an hour at best. $10 is now, hey, I can get a job for $10 to $12 an hour. That's a good job. And yet inflation has wiped out almost all that, the spending power of what $13.25 my brother was making. You know, that's been wiped out. $13.25 doesn't buy the same things today as it did back in the 70s.
Mister, how much industry is left in the United States of America today? And this is the problem. I remember back in 1961 when I first got involved with unions, I was working in private industry. And believe it or not, I think 75% of our whole country Polish people. Yeah. And what turned me off was I was supervisor in the factory. I came from Ireland 6 months before that. And I saw what happened to the people. I saw one man whose daughter was getting married on Saturday, and the manager of the plant refused to let him take the day off. And that's when I got mad. And then I went home, and I said, I don't want to be a supervisor. I checked for the unions, didn't know anything about them. I just had arrived from Ireland, found the United Paper Workers of the National Union, was a paper company. Called them, and next 2 days later, we were out. It took us 9 months to organize that plant, okay? Because we had to have interpreters and everything else. But we won the election, and we negotiated our first contract. I was the happiest guy in the world.
I remember that, Joe.
Yeah.
And,
I was the happiest person.
Where
in the
was
world.
this, Joe?
Yeah, where was
This was, pardon me, Cromwell Paper Company, Local 788, okay?
47th and Whipple in
47th
Chicago.
and Whipple.
Yeah.
And it was like, that plant was like a League of Nations because
sure was.
we had a large African American population, we had a large Polish, first generation Polish population, some Irishmen,
Yeah.
and
actually Cubans.
and Cubans, and quite in the management of the company also. The guy who was the plant manager, I think, he was from Germany, and some said he was in the German army.
He was the engineer, whatever you call him, in a big title.
I think his name was Rupp.
Yeah, Rupp. He was an SS troop.
And that's yeah. Well, that's what I thought. And then
Don't make him a bad guy.
and the executive vice president of the company was a German Jew.
Yes.
His name was Fleck. I'll never forget
right.
that. And he used to do translating when the Germans were when we were taking a town over in Germany. He would, or in that area, and he'd do the translating for the American troops when the German army surrendered, and he would help work out the surrender agreement. I mean, so this was the type of plant this was. It was a very interesting paper plant, and I recall that.
Polish Jews with their arms printed to go to the gas chamber.
Yeah. Those jobs, though, back then paid
But anyway,
pretty
just
good.
to finish, I negotiated a contract with the help of the United Paper Workers International Union, and I negotiated a good contract. We had nothing. We got health insurance, life insurance, pension plan, seniority rights, and above all, job security. And that man was never denied again. And the one thing I wanted in that contract was overtime shall not be compulsory. And that man who didn't go to his daughter's wedding could go to anybody's wedding after that.
One of the things that I'd like to add to this whole thing, what happened with the public employees, like teachers, I was with the teachers union, was that we got smart. A lot of us were from working class families, and in the 70s and early 80s, we started really organizing, I mean thoroughly. And that's where the public employees had good benefits, but we started raising our wages. At the same time, the private sector was being attacked, and those unions, which used to set the wages for everybody else, you know, somebody mentioned here earlier, the unions set the wages and benefits for the non-union. That was declining.
I heard, Tom, prior to that time, there was some sort of feeling like, you know, with teachers that we're professional people, we don't need a union, and we're above this. Was there anything like
well,
that?
that existed really, that existed to a certain degree, especially with management and with some teachers back in the 60s and stuff. But, you know, what happened is as education expanded and more in college, the GI Bill allowed a lot of guys coming back from the war, from working class families, come back from World War II, going to college. A lot of men started entering teaching as a profession, and women too. And schools were, you know, population was growing, more people were attending high school. They said, hey, look, it's stupid not to have a union, and so they organized.
We have an interruption here. John, do we have a phone call?
Yes, we do.
We have a phone call,
Mary,
folks.
you can use that.
The lifeblood of a talk show.
Do we use these?
Can.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello, Jack.
Yeah, who's this? Is this
Jack,
be Don?
Jack, Don Figuarelli, Jack.
We got Don Figuarelli, the Don of Sports on the air. Okay, Don, what is it?
Yeah. Well,
What it
Jack,
is?
I was wondering what the fellas there thought of the current union problem here in Chicago with the teachers. I'm just going to kind of give my viewpoint, and I'll hang up and I'll try to listen to what you fellas thought. At first, I was not a union man when I first started working, okay? I was a salesman out on the road, and union, I think it was too restricted, whatever, you know. Okay, then later on in life, I got a position where I had to join the union, and which was fine because it had some protection there, some employment protection. So, you know, I didn't mind it. But to me, this current strike is out of hand. I don't think, you know, perhaps they could have negotiated longer, but it just gives a bad eye to me, to the teachers walking around acting silly, carrying signs, protesting. They want more money, and then again, now again, I'm going anti-union. You know what I'm saying? So now that I'm retired, I can say that. You know, so I just thought I'd like to ask the fellows what their opinion were on that.
We'll throw it out there. I know.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Don.
Take care.
One thing for sure, as we all know from where all our various encounters and dealings with the boys in the press, so often the story doesn't really get out there. I mean, no matter what it may be. Even my dad said years ago, go to a ball game, then come home and read about it in the paper the next day and see if it was the same game you went to. So sometimes things are just too simplified, complex situations are glossed over and made simple. Okay, what does anyone think? Anyone want to start off here?
Yeah, I'd like to. First of all, I think that again, when you look at what's advertised in the media and what the teachers are actually confronted with, but not knowing all of the facts, you know, because everybody reads news reports and listens to what's going on, try to find it out. But some things that appear to be irrefutable is the fact that it was almost like the administration in the city was poking the teachers in the eye, saying, you know, they changed legislation, raising the bar for the strike vote, requiring a 2/3 vote before they could consider striking. There was an expansion of private schools that would then decrease the number of teachers teaching in the public school system under different conditions without any union representation. And I think a larger issue than the actual money were some of the rights under the collective bargaining agreement. And for example, they have this question about teacher evaluation, and the evaluation that would determine whether or not one could actually be fired and what their promotional or wage increases would be over circumstances and conditions that the teachers really don't have any control over. There's so many variables determining how well a child will do in school, and to have an arbitrary cutoff number for the teachers, I think that represented a very serious problem for the teachers, and I sympathize with them over that. In addition, this question of teachers having the right to transfer if their school is shut down, and whether or not they would have a right to take an open position, available position in another school, was going to be denied to them. And stop and think about this. If you had a job and you worked at a particular job and somebody said, your job is eliminated, but we're going to hire somebody new to take the same job at another location, wouldn't you say, shouldn't I get some consideration for that first? And so these are some of the issues that affect the teachers, and we're all in hopes that it'll get resolved, and it very well may. But I can understand the frustration and the problems that the teachers are going through.
Bill Coogan? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, who raised it up to 2/3 of a vote?
State legislature.
The legislature did. The politicians again.
Right.
And you know what? Congratulations to them. Because you don't want to hit the street and not have everybody behind you.
Yeah,
we did that.
I thought it was 80% of the people had a vote. But
yeah, you don't want to hit the street without them, and we did that. We had several pre-strike votes to make sure everybody was on, because the city was, passing down communist propaganda.
Well, when they announced the change in the law, I thought it was kind of funny, because I figured if they couldn't get 80% or 66, whatever the percent was.
You're
But
lost.
they'd be dead to go on
Yeah,
strike with just
sure.
a simple majority. That'd be crazy. I'd like to just add a few things. I think there's several factors causing the strike. One, I think Mayor Daley, prior to leaving,
Which one?
Yeah.
Richard, the current one,
Number two.
the
Not leaving the
most
third.
recent one,
Current one, see?
with the backing of the business communities, wanted to set up a lot of charter schools and basically non-union schools, and so that created a lot of animosity. And then when Bazard came in as the superintendent from Rochester, New York, they unilaterally violated the contract. They set up, they got individual votes in the bargaining unit, schools that were in the union, not the charters now, to vote to lengthen the day. Now the union said, "Oh, we'll lengthen the day, but we want to have a voice in it." So there was a lot of animosities created prior to the beginning of negotiations. Once my understanding of the issues now is it's not about how much the pay raise is going to be. It's about two big issues. One is evaluation. The state of Illinois 2 years ago passed a very comprehensive education reform law. It requires that about 30% of the evaluation be based on student scores. My understanding is the city wants 45%. And then what we already mentioned, the transfer issue is a big. Is it the principal that has the sole power to fill positions, even if you got a school that closed? Because the population of Chicago is always changing and shifting. So you could be in a school 20 years, you could be a very effective teacher, and all of a sudden your job is cut because everybody else in that school has been around a long time, and you're the least senior. And then you go for another job, and you can't get a job because somebody else has a pet they want to hire or something. So, I mean, there's all this, I think, animosity and this bargaining. I don't think it's the money is how much the pay raise could be is a big issue.
Interesting. Interesting, Tom. Excuse me, just one moment. I consider myself a layperson when it comes to understanding everything about union. But it just occurred to me this morning. According to the news, our mayor is going to court to tell the teachers or tell them, you get back to work, and whatever he has in mind about the force.
The judge refused to rule on it until Wednesday.
All right, so I'm not that updated.
Because supposedly because the union is going to vote between now and Wednesday, and he said they should wait until the union votes before he will issue a ruling. Yeah.
Well, I feel I don't have a negative mind, but as I was driving, I said to myself, is there some underlying current here to have more charter schools that are not union, and that the teachers themselves or whoever will represent them have a inkling that this possibly could turn into a reversal of all they're fighting for? So let's get it down on paper. Let's get this part understood, because this could be the new change.
You're
Going to-
absolutely right
Well,
on that.
And I don't
They
know
won't
what
have an
made
inkling
me
either. They
think
know.
like that. That's right. There is more to this story than
Well,
we
another-
are aware
Well,
of.
Tom, another-
We caught on to that. You're
Another
absolutely
big,
right.
another big bone of contention with the teachers is supposedly there are plans to close approximately 100 schools. So it could be a fact that, congratulations, your union negotiated a tremendous contract, but you're fired.
Go work for Walmart.
There you are, Tom.
And like was just brought up, without the right to transfer, basically you're screwed.
And one of the issues out there is that there's about 600 schools in Chicago. If you give each principal the right to hire whoever they want, regardless of any seniority, you get a lot of teachers who are in the second late part of their careers out on the streets. And
Well, that doesn't make sense, Tom. This letting the principal hire.
Well, that's
He's just an employee of the
and
CPS also.
I mean, I taught 5 years in Chicago, and quite frankly, our whole faculty revolted against the principal because he was a total incompetent
There you
jerk.
are.
That's
You know,
what it was
right.
used for. It's a great way to bring politics back into it.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's why
It's a perfect way to bring politics
Yes.
back into it.
I'd like to say one other thing. This reform law I talked about earlier is actually both the IEA and the Illinois American Federation of Teachers, the two large teacher unions, endorsed the law. Now, they agreed to some stuff they didn't necessarily like, but it does really put a very complex system for evaluation and for maintaining your job through tenure. Tenure is no longer the tenure we had 4 years ago. It's a different tenure law now.
Joe Mescal, please.
I would like to ask Bill, seeing he's the real expert in unions here after negotiating millions of contracts. Bill, how long do you think it'll take before the charter school teachers will wake up and say, hey, we want to get out of this, we want to be in unions?
Yeah, I don't think it'll take long at all. I think you're already seeing some activities in that respect from what I hear. But the bigger problem is this, and I think that when we talk about charter schools, and in those charter schools is the parents get money in the form of a voucher to send their children to a charter school. It's draining money out of the system, out of the educational system, the public school education system. And I don't know, maybe it's oversimplification, but it seems to me that if we've got underperforming schools, public schools, and we need to determine what's causing that and what resources those schools need and work on improving them, rather than sucking money out of the system and creating a privatized school system. And that's where this is going, where big money interest and corporations will be running the school system. And we're seeing so much of this going on. We're seeing it with the attempt at the charter schools. And with regard to the legislation, that this legislation was sponsored by and supported by big money interest. This, what the name is, it's something in support of the children.
Yeah, Save the Children.
Save the Children organization.
It's backed by the Wirtz family and others.
Right.
I mean, big money in Chicago.
Sure.
Big money interest supported this legislation to get passed in the state legislature.
Yeah, and can I just add something there? And the two unions bargained with in the Springfield through lobbying, got a bill that they could live with. I mean, it wasn't they were all happy with it, but you're absolutely right. To Save the Children, I think that's the name of the group.
Yeah.
They were the ones that got the.
And I can't. Does this sound like socialism?
Yeah, but
to
I
you?
can't.
Yes.
I don't recall the fellow's name that was one of the main movers and shakers in this group of big money interest. But he went to some like conventions and bragged about how he snookered the legislators in the state of Illinois getting this legislation passed. And this guy actually was bragging about. So I mean, when you look at these dynamics in place and how they were poking the teachers, we're going to do this to you, we're going to do that to you, and then replace you with non-union charter school and then you'll have no rights or transfer rights. So there's a very serious problem, and I think that hopefully, collective bargaining can work, and collective bargaining can work in a very positive, constructive way if you have all people in good faith at the bargaining table that are working on the issues and the problems. I've negotiated contracts where I've had companies in deep trouble, either in bankruptcy, ready to go into bankruptcy, and said, what can we do to save this business? And identify the problems, negotiate, and sometimes the workers and our members didn't like the fact that we had to come back to them and say, we've got to take a pay cut. We've got to do this, we've got to do that. But at least we save good jobs and eventually get back to where we were at. And this is distinguished against what just recently happened in Joliet, Illinois with the International Association of Machinists and Caterpillar. Here you had a company that made record profits, breaking records, and then turn around and the workers get nothing and telling the workers after taking concessions they were. So we got serious structural economic problems in the country.
Okay, hey, Bill, I want to ask you a question about the charter schools as we're on that subject. Isn't this a private enterprise?
Yes.
Okay, and the Priskers are involved in this?
Oh, no.
I'm not sure of that. I think
Yes,
I saw
they
some
are.
reports.
Yes,
Yeah,
they are.
yeah.
Okay.
One of the biggest points that Karen Lewis made in her interview yesterday about why they didn't settle, she said, and she repeated this, and she emphasized it, that the teachers want to read the contract, look it over before they vote, and she emphasized the fact that the teachers do not trust the Board of Education. They don't trust the mayor. They want to see it in writing, and before they they vote on it.
Gee,
You mean
isn't
to tell me-
it strange? Isn't that a strange way to do
Wait,
things?
you mean to tell me they're going to read this before? We didn't even read the stimulus package.
Nancy Pelosi
We didn't read the
said-
Obamacare.
Well, let me
either.
say something about this all this whole thing here. We're always talking about sector public schools, the teachers. The public schools have much more than the teachers. Knowing the way our local politicians work, there's an opportunity to put lots of ward healers in these different non-teaching spots. Like you'll have, where a parochial grade school will have 2 women that know every kid in the school, every family, all the tuition, everything. They'll have 10, 12 people in the mimeograph department, even though there's no more mimeograph. They're sent over there. I know from experience seeing these things happen. And before we even get vilifying or deifying the teachers, I was listening to one of the call-in shows. I think it was on WLS last week, and I forget who the man was. I think he was a former head of one of our former presidents of the school board here. And he was talking about what we first need is this sort of quality teaching and whatever the teaching. No, BS. I almost said a bad word. That's a bunch of nonsense. What you need is a peaceful and an orderly environment in which to start teaching, because you put so much responsibility on the teachers and zero authority to follow. Am I right? Is this what we run into now?
Yeah.
Don't you think that's true?
Well,
They're the parent.
Yes.
For
This,
Well, if
6
you think
hours.
of the whole effort to drive down unions, whether it's public or private sector, is really an attack on democratic institutions. The labor movement is part of an effort, a historic effort, to create a more just and democratic society, and to weaken unions and stuff is to turn power over to somebody else. And where's that power shifting in this country? And since the 1950s and 60s, it's shifting to these people at the top, the Koch brothers and others.
Polk brothers.
Koch.
Oh, the Polk brothers.
Koch brothers.
We gotta go for a break now, gang. I'm getting a strong signal time.
Yeah. Before we break, just one final thing. I'd like to get into a topic about what labor movement represents in this country. So I'll just leave
You
it.
do that on your show then.
Okay.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians. We'll be back momentarily following these announcements.
How are the tires on your vehicle? Do you need motor oil or transmission fluid, power steering fluid or antifreeze? How are your wiper blades? Are they in good, sharp condition? Is the washer fluid in your tank full? How good's your battery? Do you need to replace light bulbs? Well, the place to pick up all these items is Berkeley Auto Supply at 5237 St. Charles Road in Berkeley. Tom at Berkeley Auto Supply has everything you need for your vehicle. He has every tool, part, and supply that you may need from the top of your roof to the bottom of your chassis. You can call Tom at 708-544-8350, and they're located at 5237 St. Charles Road in Berkeley. Tom's hours are Monday through Friday from 8 to 8, Saturdays 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Sundays from 10 to 3 p.m. That's Berkeley Auto Supply at 5237 St. Charles Road, just east of Wolf Road and west of Manheim Road, about 2 miles. Call us 708-544-8350 for parts, tools, and supplies. It's Berkeley Auto Supply.
Centralized than ever before.
And now back to our panel and today's discussion. Jack?
So,
Hello, gang. We're back.
have the right
Now, we've had a special request
common sense.
from Brother John Koscielko. He said he wanted to take a little time out from our labor. He says something about his the Civil War. Is that still going on?
Well, I thought it is a date that we should be aware of. We're talking about September the 17th, and I mentioned earlier that it's Constitution Day, the anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution, which is fundamental to all of our rights and liberties as Americans. And it's an important day in the history of the Civil War. On this day, September the 17th, 150 years ago, 1862, was fought the Battle of Antietam. It's not the best known of all Civil War engagements. Most people who know anything about the Civil War have heard of Gettysburg. They may have heard of Vicksburg. They know about the surrender at Appomattox, but Antietam they may not know about. It was a battle that was fought near Antietam Creek, or creek, if you prefer, a body of a river that, oddly enough, it rises near Gettysburg. It originates near Gettysburg, the site of the greatest battle of the Civil War, and it empties into the Potomac near Harper's Ferry, today West Virginia, in those days Virginia, which is, of course, the site of John Brown's raid, which was one of the precipitating causes of the Civil War. Southerners call it the Battle of Sharpsburg. They prefer to take the name of the nearby town, but in the Union and pretty much to history, it's known as the Battle of Antietam because of the creek. It was the bloodiest single day in American history. 22,000 Americans were killed, wounded, or missing at the end of that one day. Gettysburg, as a battle, exceeds it. There were over 50,000 casualties at Gettysburg, but Gettysburg was spread over 3 full days of harsh fighting. With Antietam, you get it all in one day. It was Robert E. Lee's attempt to move north. It was his first big move north. Antietam is in Maryland, which was a Union state. It had been a slave state, but it remained in the Union. And it was a movement that had as its possible objective Washington, D.C. And George McClellan, probably the most maligned Union general of the Civil War, and deservedly maligned for many reasons. McClellan was a thoroughly obnoxious individual in terms of his attitude toward Abraham Lincoln. He had utter contempt for his commander-in-chief, referred to him as the baboon and ape Lincoln. But the fact of the matter is, McClellan fought Lee to a draw, and in effect defeated Lee. I mean, you can make the argument that he defeated Lee because Lee's objective was to move forward, and McClellan stopped him and had the opportunity. If McClellan had been a more energetic general, if he had moved on the following day, he might have destroyed Lee's army and won the Civil War in 1862. He had victory in his grasp. He had far more forces than Lee did. He outnumbered Lee overwhelmingly, but the trouble with McClellan was no matter how many men he had, he didn't have enough. And then Lincoln was, of course, thoroughly exasperated. This was the second time that McClellan had commanded the army. Lincoln had sacked McClellan once, brought him back because he couldn't find any other general able to do a better job. But the fact of the matter is that on September the 17th, 1862, George McClellan did defeat Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Antietam.
He went off later and ran for president?
He was a Democratic candidate in 1864, was defeated by Abraham Lincoln. He went on to be governor of New Jersey, so he did have a career afterward. But the interesting thing is that Lee retired and doesn't move north again until the following year, when, of course, he moves into Pennsylvania, and you wind up with the great cataclysmic Battle of Gettysburg. And one final thing, Antietam is important for another reason. 5 days after this victory at Antietam, Abraham Lincoln announces his intention to issue the Emancipation Proclamation on January the 1st of 1863. He had wanted to issue the Emancipation Order earlier, but his Secretary of State, William Seward, had said, Mr. President, if you issue this when our armies are in defeat, it will look like the last shriek of a defeated force. We have to win a victory to make this stick. And so he gets Antietam, which is not a full-fledged victory, but it's enough of a victory for Lincoln, and he announced his intention to free the slaves. Of course, it only freed the slaves in the states in rebellion. It didn't literally free any slaves because it only applied to those states that were at war with the United States. But that was the second outcome of the Battle of Antietam.
That battle makes me think of Frank Leahy's words. Playing for a tie is like kissing your sister.
Yeah, and the emancipation, though, it did not, as he said, it did not free any slaves at that moment.
No.
But the fact that there were almost 99% or 90% of all the slaves were under Confederate control meant that slavery was a dead institution in the United States as a result.
Like Britain and France could not join on the side of a slave country.
And Lincoln, of course, Lincoln believed that the president's power as commander-in-chief was virtually unlimited. And so he issues it as a war measure. He frees the slaves, saying this will take away from the power of those who are fighting against us. There's no constitutional provision that gives him the right to do this, and he couldn't have done it in peacetime. He could have never considered doing it in peacetime. But as a war measure, he felt he had the peg to hang his hat on. So that's another thing that flows from the Battle of Antietam.
And who won? Who won?
What?
The Union.
Of course,
Army.
the Union.
Yeah.
The Union Army.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, what-
And that ties, so that does tie in with our history of the Union.
I guess there's something to be said
wear
for
union-
unions, huh?
Union underwear in the winter.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Thank you.
Listen, let's not...
Civil War interlude.
before we get back to our topic of labor, you mentioned Maryland, and I have to mention this. Now you mentioned Maryland. For years, my mother-in-law and my wife's maiden name was Jones, but mother-in-law's maiden name was Wilson, and they were from Western Kentucky. But she said her family. She's talking about we're related to King George, and she's talking about the Calvert family.
Oh,
So I said Calvert. That was the founding people of Maryland.
Lord Baltimore.
Yeah, Leonis, Lord Baltimore, founded as a Catholic colony. So all of a sudden, my daughter, in 6 months or so ago, my younger one, she got on this Ancestry.com. And it turns out my mother-in-law, and hence my wife and the two kids, are all direct descendants of Leonis. Leonis, Lord. So I've got nobility in the family, and
Well,
I call her Lady Baltimore now, my wife. So
when Lee's army invaded Maryland, he ordered his band. He ordered the Southern Army bands to play "Maryland, My Maryland," da 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 da. And he thought this would stimulate the people of Maryland to rise against and it didn't work. All along the marching route, everyone was pulling down their shades, shutting the door, calling the kids and the dogs inside. It did not work. He did not inspire any pro-Southern sympathy
It works 1 year
amongst the Maryland.
every year it works
Right.
at a certain racetrack.
At Pimlico, yeah, it does, yeah.
And
Which one is
Listen,
that?
let's not forget our Jewish friends.
Same music
Right.
as the
Today is
Christmas
their
tree.
holiday, Yom
Yeah.
Yeah, Rosh
Yeah.
Hashanah. Rosh
Yeah.
Hashanah.
No, Rosh Hashanah.
New Year?
Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah.
The Jewish
Rosh
New
Year's.
Hashanah? Okay.
Yeah, they got the Jewish Rose
Shows
Bowls
you
on
how
later.
Jewish
Well,
I am.
since Jack's family
bring
is
it up, though.
in the monies,
Yeah,
and,
right.
and the union people are not fighting for the money. You know they're not fighting for the money. I've got a great article regarding the dollar bill. If you all permit me, I'd rather listen to you about the union and the progress and what Joe got mad about and started and so on. And if we have time, then I'll tell you about the dollar bill. So
Do we have to address Jack now as your lordship, or is that?
Yeah.
I'm nothing. I might as well be the carriage guy.
You're a big nothing.
You may as well be like Kate Middleton, huh?
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy, I don't want to see you, though, on vacation.
You had to say that. Now I'm picturing John topless.
Yeah.
It's not a pretty sight.
Used to be.
Let's get back to the union.
Yeah.
Okay, back to
out of
your-
our
we
mind.
can
We
always
could.
talk about money.
I'd like to follow up on something that Tom said earlier and not allow it to escape us. And that is that we talked about what's happened to the middle class and the working class in the country, and this is both the private sector and the public sector. And statistically, and these are irrefutable facts, that if you look at the decline of wages and income of the middle class and their income over the last 30 years, it has been stagnant. In the last 10 years, it has actually gone down. So the facts are that people are making less today, adjusted for inflation, than what they were making 10 years ago. And that wages overall have not, for the middle class, have not increased, have been stagnant for 30 years. So we've been confronted with policies, economic policies in the country that have had a direct impact on the economic welfare of the middle class. And the reason I say that, when you also look at labor in the private sector, and there's been a significant decline of density and membership in the private sector, and especially in manufacturing, and there's a number of reasons for that. We've entered into trade agreements that have not been good trade agreements for our country. We've allowed these trade agreements to decimate our manufacturing base, and a lot of it is being supported by corporations that, quite frankly, are greedy and can make more money by paying people a lot less in China, Mexico, a lot of other places. And we've seen that negative impact overall And so what's happened is the decline of the middle class has taken place. So has the economic welfare of the country, because the country, 75% of our gross domestic product has been supported, our economy supported by consumers of the middle class buying things and purchasing things. And you know, we bought into a plan, and I remember this following up on what Tom said, where years ago when I went to work and when Joe Mescal was working in a factory, one income was enough to support a family. It wasn't easy. You had to bust your around, work some overtime, but you know what? You could do it, and you could have the middle class dream, and you could support your family, and your spouse didn't have to work. But then all of a sudden, the spouse went to work, and we said, well, the spouse is going to work to buy some extra stuff. You know, we can get a better car or a new TV or whatever. So the spouse started working. And we said, well, that's all right, because that's going to extra stuff. Well, what eventually happened was that we found ourselves as the prime breadwinner income person in the family. Their income was stagnating and decreasing. The spouse's income then was supplementing that, which was supporting the family. And we've seen more of that change taking place, where it required two people working in the family to accomplish economically what one person was able to accomplish. Then as that started to erode, we said, oh, don't worry about it. What you can do is get a credit card, go on credit, buy a lot of stuff on credit. So we had the spouse that was for extra stuff, didn't work out. We had the credit that was for extra stuff, wasn't work. All of a sudden that started to become a necessity. We depended on credit, we depended on a two-income, now even more than two-person income in the family. Then we went a step further and we said, you know what? There's another way to get some money. And what you can do is put your house in hock, get a home equity loan, you get a lot of money out of your house. So now you got the spouse working, you got the credit card going, and you got your house is a piggy bank, things are going, you can pay this. In the meantime, the general middle class was lulled into what I call the boil the frog theory, you know, where little by little, as we were getting a shaft, we didn't realize it, because we were accessing all these other means to try to support what the family needed to support them. And in the meantime, unions were being attacked mercifully, and I know...
Mercilessly.
Yeah, thank you.
Mercilessly, yeah.
Yeah, mercilessly. Said Chicago School Education. Anyway, the... But the... and you've seen the decline of the unions, and this is, you know, we've got to have some serious, I think, discussions, and I'd like to see the politicians engaging in more as to the structural economic problem that our country has and the role that organized labor played in building the middle class and we were at.
Bill, this is Chicago. You'd like to see the politicians do that? Well, don't you realize this is Chicago, Bill?
John, you
this is Illinois.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Cicero.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't part of the problem that young people today have a much different level of expectations than my parents did, than my grandparents did? My grandparents, my parents, my aunts and uncles' attitude was, if you can't afford to pay for it cash, you can't afford it.
Right.
You work, you save money, and then you buy the luxuries. Young people today think if they're making $40,000 a year, they expect to live like they're making $80,000. If they're making $80,000, they expect to live like they're making $150,000. Everybody wants to live at a level beyond what they're able financially to support.
God bless the credit card.
That expectation is certainly encouraged on TV and radio.
Absolutely.
I agree with
commercials. What Bill laid out, I think, and it's a very clear picture of what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years. The only thing I'd add to that is that, you know, we don't have an 8-hour day in the United States for most people.
No.
It's still on the books, but what you have not only husband and wife working, but you also have them working several jobs. And what you laid out about the easy credit in the banks, credit card companies, the home mortgage industry, they were making tremendous amount of money by encouraging people to borrow beyond their means. The only problem with that is once you get to a recession, this recession or Great Recession, Depression, in my mind it's a depression, the whole system collapsed. It was a house of cards built on low wage, easy credit, and a declining middle class, and low manufacturing.
We talked about fair trade, or whatever you like to call it. between Mexico and all the other countries, bring it into the United States of America, while our people are not even working. Now, what way can you solve the problem? Throughout the world, we have $13 trillion of American industry overseas. Do we or do we not? Now, I can go back to Ireland, the only country I know about anyway, that I can get a whole hunk of land for nothing, build my factory for nothing, get my people working over there, and their corporate gains tax is 12%.
Oh my.
Where here it's 35, 36%. So therefore, how do we solve the problem? Shouldn't the politicians wake up and say, wait a minute, let's get industry, heavy industry, all industry, back to the continent of the United States of America and let the American people go to work and earn a decent living.
Isn't that where the real cost is, not in the wages, though, and things like that?
Well, I
Cost of
think
doing
a couple
business?
of things. First of all, Joe, all respect, I think when you look at the taxes you cite, you have to look at the effective tax rate. That may be the highest tax rate, but the actual taxes that are paid are more in the 12% area that you're talking about than the 35 or 36% area. But I think that, again, we have to look at these trade agreements. We need, it's one thing to have free trade, but it's got to be fair, and it hasn't been. And that's where the problem, and the attack on organized labor, as I mentioned, the Caterpillar situation is a good example of it. For workers to be able to organize, there's not effective protection under our law today that gives workers a comfort zone in being able to organize. If you did a poll of non-union workers, and some people have done this, like 60-70% would like to have a union. But when you go on the shop floor to organize them, they're scared. Mm-hmm. They're intimidated. They're harassed. In some cases, they're fired. And it's very, very difficult. And we need laws because we talked about the economic aspects of what unions accomplish for workers, and there's no question about that, private and public sector. But there's another significant fact that we haven't mentioned. And that significant fact goes to workers' rights. That goes to a place at the table to talk about your terms and conditions of employment and your opportunity to talk to your boss about the conditions under which you're going to be working. And just about all the collective bargaining agreements, all the contracts, have a provision in them that makes reference to due process and workers' rights. And if you read just about any contract, there will be a provision that states an employer can only discipline or discharge an individual for just cause, or the operative term is cause. That term is so significant because it means you have a right. Your boss can't just arbitrarily, unfairly fire you because there's no law that's in effect in our country that gives workers the rights to due process under this just cause principle. Now, there are laws that, the Civil Rights Act and other anti-discrimination laws, and if somebody's trying to form a union, they have a right under the National Labor Relations Act to not be discriminated against if you can prove it. But that just cause provision in a contract establishes such a valuable right for workers, and people don't recognize it. They don't realize it's there for them.
Yeah, when they created the collective bargaining...
To finish up on what I was saying, take the city of Chicago today and the teachers' union. Who is going to pay for the teachers' salaries today?
We are.
The property owners. There is no industry left in the city of Chicago. We have lost millions and millions and millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars from industry into the city treasury each year because all our industry is gone. There's nothing left. So what I'm saying is we have to do something to politicians, get industry back to the city of Chicago and to the United States.
And one of the reasons for that is, and I served in the legislature, is that Illinois for decades has been a very hostile state toward business and industry.
Exactly.
And it's been very easy for business and industry to relocate in other states. And they're not going to California, or they're going to Wisconsin and Nebraska and Iowa. They're going to Indiana because the surrounding states are much more interested in accommodating business and industry than Illinois is.
They're going to right to work states.
If you want to help the working man, if you want to help the middle class, you're not going to achieve it by punishing business and industry. That's why what the gentleman said about taxation is right. We have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And so long as we've got the highest corporate tax rates in the world, we are not going to have the level of expansion of industry in the United States. I'd like to see us become the manufacturing giant that we were in the 40s and 50s. But the way you're going to do
One
that...
area which we almost touched on, and we're talking about the highest tax rates and all, is when being Constitution Day, we should get back to basics and look at that old Constitution, and we're supposed to see what this federal monster is supposed to be doing for us, providing for the common defense, what else, promote interstate commerce. What do we do? Well, there's only a certain number of things that are enumerated, but there's so many programs, so many bureaus, so many departments we got now. I mean, the government is probably, the federal government is probably grown how many hundred times since the great, since the New Deal?
I mean, when FDR became president, I think the level of federal expenditure was like maybe 1 or 2% of our GNP. Today, it's somewhere in the vicinity of 20%.
That's gross national product.
Yeah, it used to be GNP. Now they say GDP. But the old term was GNP. In those days, it was GNP.
It was, right.
Well, they have a rule now. They have a rule now in Congress that every bill that's introduced, you have to cite the provision in the Constitution that justifies this piece of legislation.
Interstate commerce clause.
Which is a good rule.
But I got to take exception to one thing, and that's regarding the reference you made to taxes.
Yeah.
And Joe mentioned that too. And the fact is, the effective tax rate on businesses in our country is the second lowest in the world. It's not the highest.
What is that based upon?
Well, it's based upon the studies that have been done on what the effect. See, what you look
then
at.
The question comes: who conducted the studies? Everybody can conduct a study.
I'll be happy to provide you with the verification and the source of what I just said, because this has been a misquoted statistic.
But it is true. It is true that our corporate tax rates, as they are legislated, are the highest in the industrialized world.
The tax rate, but when you take all of the deductions in the account, all the exceptions...
But then that becomes the choice of the person doing the study, how they're going to interpret it, and what they're going to put in, and what they're going to take out.
The point is what's actually paid. That's the point. I mean, we got to look at what's actually paid. And this is the misnomer. Our tax rates for business are the second lowest in the modern industrialized world.
They're the highest.
Okay,
they are the highest.
I didn't. No, they're not.
You're interpreting them and taking someone's interpretation of how different things affect.
I'll be happy to provide, if we take leave at some point, we can have a discussion about that, and I'll be happy to bring the statistics in. And so and the other thing is, it's just like our taxes. For the wealthy in general.
Can I ask you a question, though? Why would it be good to have high taxes on? How is that going to benefit the middle class by having high taxes on corporations? How does that benefit anybody?
Well, first of all, let me explain something to you. That when you look at the tax rates in our country,
you can tell me so. You're not necessarily going to explain it.
Okay. Well, I'll attempt to. But let me. When you look at the taxes in the country and what's been paid, there's been more jobs created and more manufacturing when we had higher taxes than when we had lower taxes.
What's the sense of that? How does the government taking money away from private business? How does that generate jobs?
Well, it generates jobs in terms of.
It may make someone feel good if you don't like business in it. It may make you feel good, but it doesn't create jobs and it doesn't benefit the workers.
Could I offer a possible answer to that question?
Sure.
Well, what taxes do is, in effect, redistribute wealth. They take money or wealth.
Where's that in the Constitution? Where does the Constitution talk about redistributing wealth?
It doesn't. But listen to what I have to say. If you tax somebody, if you tax people, that money goes into the public coffers. What happens with when the money is spent? If it's spread out among the people, because we're all citizens, so under a government, tax money is supposed to be spent for the common good. So when it's spread out among the common good, not concentrated in the hands of a few, the wealth of the country, the average person spends all the money in the domestic economy. They attend in other words, a high wage, high benefit system for the common people. Everyone benefits from that. That comes from taxes. So taxes are a way. By cutting taxes, you redistribute wealth. By raising taxes, someone's going to get that money. Where does it go? How is it spent? These are all the questions that
And the premise, which is why I broke in, the premise of your explanation is that redistributing wealth is a good thing and something we ought to do. And I would argue that the founding fathers of this country, who were by and large wealthy men, did not set this country up for the redistribution of wealth.
I'm not saying
there's no legal justification. You may think it's a good idea.
It's a fact.
But redistribution of wealth is utterly unfair and it's utterly un-American.
Well,
That's
actually,
not what this country. We're not a socialist society. That's what socialism's all about.
My point isn't it's constitutional. It's a fact.
Of course it's not. You just want it done regardless of whether it's
please
constitutional or not.
Listen,
Well,
all
this
I'm
sounds
saying
like
is
a Saul
anytime you
Alinsky,
anytime you
type,
tax, your tax structure,
deals.
whether your tax structure, how much you charge for taxes, and there's all the founding fathers did charge taxes. Taxes take money from some people and spread it out in different ways.
And it's only supposed to be done for those things that are provided for in the Constitution, not to redistribute. No, that's not a purpose of government. To redistribute wealth. No.
General welfare?
Absolutely not. It says promote the general welfare, not provide it. Government doesn't provide the general welfare.
We can argue about the Constitution, and I don't want to go back to
That's what we ought to do.
But let's talk about the real facts. And
the Constitution's not a real fact.
I want to talk about the facts we're dealing with.
When did the Constitution stop being a real fact?
I want to talk about what we're dealing with today.
Hold that thought. We have a break coming. I'm getting a signal from the room. Here we go.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians. We'll be back momentarily following these announcements.
Well, friends, now that the summer season is over, it's time to start getting your home ready for the winter season. It won't be long before the snow and ice storms will be here. Oh, I hate to think about that. So now is the time to check the roof on your home. Make sure the roof is in good shape. If you have a bad roof, your attic or crawl space could get mildew or mold and could get drip on your ceilings in your rooms, which could cause damage to the ceilings. Sooner or later, you are going to have to get your roof repaired or replaced. So don't have double expense. Call Best Brothers Roofing at area code 630-616-1359, and Mike Besch will drive over in his shiny red truck with ladders on top and Best Brothers Roofing signs on the doors. Mike will look at your roof and give you an estimate and go from there. So once again, don't have drip on your ceilings in your rooms or have double expense. Call Best Brothers Roofing at area code 630-616-1359 for a free estimate on your roof. That's Best Brothers Roofing, 630-616-1359. Now don't forget, today is Monday, September 17th. Friday will be the first day of autumn, and that is going to be all downhill from now until next year. So make sure that you have a good roof on your house. Don't have double expense, because you're going to have to get the roof repaired and get your ceilings repaired. So call Best Brothers Roofing, area code 630-616-1359.
One of the things, every one of us has to balance our checkbook once a month. Why can't the government do it? Why did he have to borrow?
Here's Jack Ryan.
Well, why did he have to borrow money? 40%.
Are we back to Chicago Historians? By the way, we're joined in progress by one of our regular members. Rich Lang is here. How are you doing, Rich?
Jack. Just fine.
Glad to see you. We had just to let everybody show up, save one. All the guests today. I'm so glad you guys come down. And we're making for a very good discussion, excellent discussion here. And I guess I just don't find myself on one side of the fence because I'm a very conservative guy politically. Been conservative since I was 16, unlike what most people say. And yet I believe in organized labor. And speaking for the organized, I think maybe Bill Kugelman feels pretty much the same way.
I tell you what, Jack, I was out to see the kids the other day, Northwest, and I drove through Randhurst and a couple of the other shopping centers out there, and conservatively I would say that 60, 65, 70% of those stores and those shopping centers are shut down.
Yes.
Now, you can argue all you want. Somebody's got to fix it.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to fix this economy.
Okay,
No matter whose fault it is, fix it.
We're getting back to the point I was talking about before was, okay, we have a federal government, okay? All these departments. You have to have a State Department. You have to have a Department of, we used to call it Department of War, Department of Defense. You have to have them, right? Department of Treasury to run things.
Exactly.
Beyond that, what are we doing with the Department of Education, who educates no one, sits back and pontificates, takes in all kinds of money, and ships a little of it back to the cities?
Yeah.
We have Department of Energy. That was started during Carter's administration.
Doesn't create any energy.
Well, not one erg. And the idea of that was supposed to be, and as Carter said, to create energy independence for the United States within a few years. Well, that's nonsense. These become, once again, bureaucracies. Now, let me also say that my daughter does work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or nuclear, which I want to say it. And so she is a governmental employee, one of super essential, I'm sure. But that's not to say you shouldn't have these certain areas. We have to have, like, providing for the common defense, protecting our borders. Seems like we're slipping in a couple of those areas to me. And certainly the idea of redistribution of wealth, I don't understand why we should be doing it for anybody. The only thing we hear so often about what the middle class, and as often as not we're referring to the working class, the middle class being like the bourgeois, the shopkeepers or whatever, those who have their own businesses. To me, that's your middle class. Working class is someone like myself, a bracero, a guy who has nothing to offer but his service, his work, his sweat, his tears. Oh, that's wrong speech. But anyway,
Jack, I had a teacher. I had a teacher at DePaul University in the 1960s. It was a very liberal fellow, but he said that the great thing about America was that virtually everyone, from the president of the bank to the janitor who swept out the place at night, if you asked them what class they belonged to, they would say, I guess I'm middle class.
They all say middle class.
Everybody is in America.
Sure,
virtually everybody thinks of themselves
the Rockefellers to the
middle class.
Yeah. But I was saying just a minute ago, somewhere along the line, we just got to get a hold of this, and to a degree. Now, I'm a guy who's never been in business. I can't balance my own checkbook. Always been out there working, spending it faster than you're making it, trying to have a little more for the family. However, it does seem that this is a country where you got to give the guy an ability. Some people an ability. That's like so many people who are on welfare right now have never known the feeling of getting a paycheck at the end of the week. With at least to a degree, you got some control over your own destiny. You're going out, you're working, you're putting in a little harder, maybe putting a little more work and better yourself. But to look at an old saying, what's good for U.S. Steel is good for the United States, to a degree is true. What's good is business. Create a business opportunity, give people a chance to go out and earn a day's work. Now, organized labor can step in and represent him to see he's properly done. Does that sound right to you folks, or am I just being too middle of the road?
Actually, the quote was General Motors. It used to be.
Yeah.
It was good
General
for
Motors.
Engine Charlie Wilson.
Engine Charlie.
What's good for General Motors.
Yeah.
But I really want to correct something. I know we got to get back to labor and what's good for business. Unfortunately, again, through the economic changes and these global multinational corporations, we're not dealing with the same impact that we were when that statement was made about General Motors. And the facts are this: our corporations, major corporations, the United States corporations, have more money. When we talk about taxes, they have more money on their balance sheets now than they've ever had. So this tax argument is a misplaced discussion, because it isn't an issue over whether or not corporations have the money. That's not the issue, or whether less taxes would make any difference.
May I respond to that, or you want
Sure.
to? The problem, and we hear all this all the time about how corporations have all this money that they're not spending. The problem is they don't know what the tax policy is going to be next year. They don't know what this election is going to produce. When they see the results of the election, you'll probably see a different
what the
response.
Problem is
but that's the problem. That's the problem.
It's not the problem
well,
at all.
Sure, we have one candidate who wants to raise taxes and one who wants to reduce taxes.
So Mitt Romney wants to raise taxes.
If you're a corporation, you're going to sit there. No, he doesn't want to raise. How does he want to raise taxes on the middle class?
You got to make $250,000.
Now, I didn't put it politically. I just said one candidate. But you made it political. How does he want to raise taxes on the middle class?
I'm not going to get off and
you got off. You're the one that got off on it.
Well, you said two politicians. Let's get.
I didn't know. I said you have two candidates who have different tax policies.
Let's talk about.
That's all I said.
Let me answer the first question you raised, and we can talk about the other one. The first question you raised was, or the issue that you raised was that corporations are not sure what the tax policies are going to be. Therefore, they're not creating jobs or investing. And my answer to that is that's hogwash. I'd have something more blunt to say.
That's a polite way of debating an issue.
Yeah, right. Okay. But the thing is this. I don't care who you are and what business you are running. If there's a demand for your product, if people are going to buy what you're making, don't tell me you're not going to sell it and go into business because you're thinking, oh, I'm not sure what my tax rate's going to be next year or the year after. You're gonna hire people. You're going to sell that product. You're going to run a business. The problem is demand. It goes back to what we were talking about, and that is when you take money out of the economy because the middle class can't afford, for the reasons we discussed previously, they can't afford to buy stuff and buy things, then employers or companies that would be selling or making those things aren't going to be able to sell or make those things because people aren't buying them. And so it's a general demand equation, not an issue of taxes. And this is the problem that I have, is that rather than factually dealing with what our economic problems are, we decide to talk about myths about taxes and this and that rather than saying, what is the problem? When we had higher tax rates, much higher. We have the lowest rates in, 30, 40 years? When we had higher tax rates and we had a thriving middle class, we had a thriving economy, we had businesses expanding and building, we had those shopping centers that were being expanded. And what caused the crash that we were confronted with? Think about what caused the economic dilemma that we're in, that's the greatest since the Great Depression. Let's not forget that.
What did cause it, though? Nobody knows, really.
Essentially,
they blame the banking industry, derivatives. I mean, none of us understand that.
Well,
part of it was the housing bubble because
we don't understand that either.
There was an attempt made to encourage people to buy homes whether they were able to afford it or not. Let me respond.
I could have. No,
that's true. I was. Let me respond to one thing, sir.
Plywood City.
Excuse me. Can I? One thing. You talk about how back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, we had high tax rates and we had a thriving middle class.
In the 70s as well.
But we came out of World War II as the only game in town. Every other industrial economy in the world was destroyed in World War II, and thank God we were intact because our enemies could not reach the United States. Our industrial plant was the only industrial plant left operating in 1945. We were the masters of the world in 1945. And so for a long time, we were exporting. We had a huge surplus of exports over imports. American industry dominated the world in that day. Sure. But unfortunately, all those other countries rebuilt and caught up with us, and then they had newer factories than we did. So that's one of the reasons that we had this economic dominance in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's why we were able to have high tax rates, but everybody was making money anyway. Our prosperity was so great that everybody was making money because we dominated the world. We don't dominate the world in the same way that we did after World War II.
Let me say something here. Just a minute, Tom.
Okay.
I'm not a computer whiz, but once in a while when I started, this is a few years back, of course, at the top of the screen, there was always a public service announcement, I guess. Do you want to buy a house? Do you want a loan?
Yeah.
You don't need a down payment.
Right.
You don't even need a social security number. Now, who caused that?
The bankers. Let me.
Oh, the bankers.
You know,
The bankers.
You know what?
The bankers
You
with
really
the idea that the
Bush
politicians would be
government.
behind.
Let me explain.
Thank you, Barney
Okay,
Frank.
But let me explain. And Barney Frank had nothing to do with that. But let me explain. Let me explain something to you. Well, you know, and again, we're really getting off the subject.
Yeah.
I want to talk about labor issues.
Yeah, I'd like to get back.
You,
to
Because
that.
well,
you raise things, and then when we talk about it, you say we're getting off the subject.
Let me-
Well, I'd like to respond to that, and
Well,
it'll
finish
take a
up
long,
here.
it'll
Yeah.
take a long time.
Could I
Go ahead.
Could I interject something here? To get back to the labor issue, Bill said something I can illustrate in my family. My oldest sister married a conservative businessman, you know, and they had a small out in St. Charles, a small clothing cleaning service. And I was talking to her, and I got in this conversation with her, and she says, "Well, we hired two part-timers," and she says, "I don't like unions because if unions come in and organize our workers, it's going to drive us out of business." So I said to him, I says, "What are you talking about?" I says, "First of all, there's not a union in the United States that's interested in two part-time workers in a dry cleaning business." I said, "They're not coming out to organize you." I said, "Why don't you think of it this way? If the unions are real weak, we know unions raise wages and benefits. If unions are weak and you have a lower and lower wages as a result in this country, they don't set high wages for people, who's going to be able to afford clothes that need cleaning?" You know, people are going to have money in their pockets to spend in the domestic economy, and I think this gets partly to the problem we've had that created this recession. The driving down of spending power of the average person has affected the lower middle class and the working class. And the reason we can't get out of this recession, in past recessions, people could buy their way out because they had savings. Workers and lower middle class had more higher level of prosperity, and they could, after a year or two, buy us out of the recessions. This current recession is so deep because everything was based on credit and debt. And I don't want to get into an argument about how that debt was created, but I could do that if you want. But the point is, a low-wage country is not good. If you look at the highest standard of living in this world, it's no longer the United States.
That's right.
It's countries like Sweden, Germany, and others who have, by the way, very high tax rates, but have
Not corporate.
not
Germany's tax rate,
let's
corporate
not-
tax
no,
rate
no,
is just that high.
But I mean,
Well, you know,
but
I
didn't
can't
say
can't disagree with you.
No,
or-
I said I'm not talking about. I don't want to get into the whole. They just have a high tax rate, okay,
okay, yeah.
for everybody. Everybody pays.
Is your
that.
sister Korean, Tom?
No, no.
I haven't seen a dry cleaner yet that
Yeah.
isn't.
Well, if you think of unions, Bill earlier said that unions mentioned some stuff that I think I want to expand on. When they created the collective bargaining laws in the United States, the Wagner Act and stuff, one part of the law that a lot of people don't understand is that the employer cannot unilaterally change things. They have to sit down and bargain with the elected representatives of the union, and then the union members vote on that contract. That's what's going on in Chicago.
Yeah.
But it's a democratic decision-making process. If you are non-union if you're a non-union worker, the employer has absolute right to unilaterally, without any input, change
You're at will.
wages. You're at
That's
will.
right.
Wages, hours, working conditions. So when they created collective bargaining laws, they modeled them on the concept of a democratic republic. You have elected representatives, bargain, you vote on it, just like you vote for your representatives. The model was based on what the United States was created by the Founding Fathers, a democratic republic. And that you even have citizenship rights. You have a right to due process and everything else. And if they violate your rights, you have a reasonable way of getting it resolved through a third-party binding arbitration. So what the collective bargaining does in the ideal is create a democratic industrial or workplace. Ideal. Now I say ideal because nothing's ideal.
It brings democracy to
It brings
the workplace.
democracy to the workplace. And where do people spend their work time? I mean, their lives. Adults spend, hopefully, a third of their day at work 5 days a week. So you spend it's either a dictatorship or a democracy. Yeah. So the attack on unions, I think, is an attack on a basic, on what something that America is all about, a nation where there's a relatively equal distribution of wealth. I mean, where people are prosperous, middle class and working class, and where people have rights.
You have upward
and a say.
mobility is the point. You have a point.
You gotta be careful with some
If
words you use.
I start the war as a farm serf, I don't have to remain a serf all my life.
But John, something that I think we just touched on a while ago, talking about the situation in our country, and I find kind of scary and disheartening, is that I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. This time in our country is, as far as I know, the only time that the next generation or the generation today is not going to be significantly or even any way better off than the previous generation. So I guess the question that I have is do you think that's going to continue? And if not, what are we doing, and what's the union role in preventing that from happening? Because right now, I believe the unemployment rate of recent college graduates is somewhere around 50%, which is scary. And those people are moving back into their parents' homes, and I mean, it's really again, I hate to say this, and it pains me every time I say it, and I wish that it wasn't true, but this is not the greatest country on the face of the earth.
And excuse me.
No, go ahead.
And another thing to your point is I think we are the last group for at least 2 more generations that will ever leave a penny to our children. I think we are the last group. You're talking about your grandchildren. I have 18. So my point about that is that's a bank account. But my point about that is I myself, in the line of work I do, I hired 17 kids for summer work, all right? I manage a country club. What am I trying to say? I have 3 that returned. This is their 2nd year, and they are 4-year college graduates. They cannot find the jobs that put them in the career that they studied for. Now you're coming to me or my place, and you're getting a very minimal salary. You're getting minimum wage, naturally. But my issue is, it made me think of that myself. One, I have younger and older grandchildren, but the point is, as they go out into the working world, there isn't that job that will let them accumulate. So if they have to stay home, that's not a bad thing, or move back home. But the whole thing is, once they move back home, from what I hear these kids saying, they're helping their own parents out who never had a money problem. So I think it'll take two generations.
You're right, and what both of you have said is right on, and I think that this goes to the structural economic problems we have in the country, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But the question was, what about unions? And I think that unions, the labor movement in the United States, is the last bastion of defense for the middle class. The labor movement will be the labor movement. A lot of people don't see this, but the labor movement is out lobbying for fair trade laws. The labor movement is the one that took on, regardless of whether Republican, Democrat, about trade laws and trade restrictions and what needs to be done, about labor laws that are going to protect people, about pardon?
NAFTA?
Well, NAFTA, they were opposed and corrections. As a matter of fact, there's a trade agreement being negotiated as we sit here with this Trans-Pacific Partnership going on. It's being done in secret. A lot of people are worried about what that's going to do.
With Columbia.
And Columbia, only the corporate lobbyists are involved in it, and the labor movement is saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? So, but that's another subject. But the thing is that we see the labor movement will be the only one out there fighting on behalf of workers. And what we get from corporate America is there's an attempt of the big money interest in this country to destroy labor. They've been fighting the private sector labor, taking private sector labor on, and for the reasons we discussed before. And after they took care of that, they said, well, the public workers, the firefighters and the coppers and the teachers, you know, they're out there. We got to take them on. They're the ones that are being taken. Make no mistake about it, that this is all part of a coordinated effort. And I don't know if any of you bother to read this stuff, but there was a group called ALEX, the American Legislative Exchange Commission, that is a national group that was sponsored by big money interests, put together lobbying group, and it's that group that's putting in all this state legislation to attack workers, public employees, attack women's rights, suppress the vote. All of these are coming, like, in the big money. And the other problem, when you look at the statistics, and we got the worst inequity of wealth in modern times in our country. We've got a transfer. In other words, our country is producing a gross domestic product that we've decided to divide up, where the top, like 5%, is getting about 90% of what the country is producing.
No, wait, you say we've decided as though someone plotted this and set this up. This is what happens when you have a free economy. This is the result of a free economy.
This is what happens when you got a manipulated economy.
Can I just say, with all due respect, I understand your point of view, but when you couch everything in terms of it's all the big money and corporate America, you're never going to solve this country's problem. For one reason, because the majority of the American people are never going to buy class warfare. Class warfare is never going to work in this country.
Let me tell you something.
And when you couch everything, all your enemies are big money. Everything is always big money.
I didn't say all our enemies.
Well, everything you've cited here in the last couple of minutes has been the ALEC is big money, and this is big money.
Well, that's where it's coming from.
And ALEC was a conservative organization. Let me ask you something.
Let me tell you something.
Isn't it true that unions also have money that they deploy supporting issues, supporting candidates?
Absolutely.
They pour money.
Absolutely.
So are you saying that the other side can't do it, but your guys, it's
like
okay to
10 to 1
do
is
it?
the ratio. But let me tell you something. You mentioned class warfare. Guess what? We've been involved in class warfare, and the statistics show what's happened to the middle class. Make no mistake about it.
You want to raise taxes to fund and redistribute the wealth.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I worked for 40-some years in the ghetto, and I'll be damned if they get any of my money.
That's right.
I really, it makes my hair curl. Not like Tom's, but
let me give you.
Wait just a minute, John.
I'm sorry.
And I'm going to give my money to some SOB that won't work, and this guy, this administration. Wait a minute. This administration just wants to take my money and give it to somebody that doesn't work?
That isn't true.
Oh, that is true. Come on, Bill.
It isn't.
Then you don't read the papers or don't see it.
It's this type of division.
And I got some guys here that come from the same type of work I do.
You make over $200,000 a year.
Can I say, you always talk about big money. Let me give you a statistic. The upper 1%, we always hear about the 1%. The last year that we have figures available for, I think, is 2010 that they've released. The upper 1% earned about 17% of the total wealth earned in that year. The total income in that year, the upper 1% earned about 17%. They paid 28% of all federal income taxes. The top 1% was paying over 1/4 of all the federal income taxes. The top 10% pays about 75% of all the federal income taxes collected in the United States. So when someone tells me our tax structure is not fair, I don't buy that.
Yeah, it's called,
not when they're paying that level of the freight. I don't buy that.
Yeah, that's called disposable income. If you have to spend,
income.
Wait, let me finish.
It's called income.
Disposable income is once you've paid for your life necessities, you have the rest of the money is disposable. In other words, you can use it for any other things, not just your food, shelter, and stuff.
The government doesn't. The government doesn't tax you on the basis of they don't ask you how much you're paying for food and shelter.
There is a graduated income tax. The more you spend, the more taxes you pay. And if you have
income, you're talking about spending. We're talking about income taxes.
You've got to make money to spend it, right?
You have to earn it to pay taxes.
Yes, and the more you have, the more you pay because you have more disposable income.
Why should you, though?
Well, that's just the nature.
Why can't everybody pay 10%?
All right, if you have somebody making, like my son, who's making $12.75 an hour, making $20,000 a year, and you charge him 10% of that, he's going to have a hard time living
But if you make 100,000 or a million or 20 million or some guys 50 million, you just pay 10%. It's a little chunk of change, of course, but it
might give him an incentive to make 100,000 because
well, no, my son works very hard. He's working 4 part-time, or we had 1 full-time job that had no benefits and paid. He's got a master's degree in biology.
But I don't like to see class. With the tax policies, we can debate a lot of that. I think, but we talk about what does the labor movement, organized labor, bring to the table, and we can talk about these things. And what it brings to the table is the ability for the workers to be able to negotiate a share of that pie. And if the workers have effective collective bargaining rights, then a lot can be done. We can negotiate with employers over trade. In other words, if I'm representing a company, like it may be Caterpillar as an example, and if the unions have enough strength to negotiate, they could say, we want to negotiate protection for workers in the United States. So rather than that plant being built in wherever it may be, in South America or in China, let's make sure we build a plant here and get workers in.
What's preventing organized labor from doing that? You talk like it's 1880 and there are no there are unions. What's preventing them from doing that?
Let me explain this to you. First of all, there's a
for all due respect, please don't tell me you're going to explain something to me, okay?
Lucy,
you present your point of view, but don't tell me you're going to explain something to me.
Because again, if you look at the facts and the statistics, which you ought to take some time and do, but the thing is that
I just quoted a few for you.
But the thing is that there's been a decline in the density of unions in the private sector.
You've said that a number of times.
You believe that or don't you?
Sure, it's certainly true.
And there's been a very.
You mean the percentage of people in unions has gone down? That's what you mean by density.
Density, right.
Yeah.
And the ability of the unions to have united collective bargaining within industries and organizing. The strength is acquired through that density and more people in unions to be able to negotiate with the employer. If you're the boss and you're dealing with a strong union, like for example the steel workers within an industry, then you can negotiate a lot of things that are going to raise the status of workers and protect workers. But if you're in an industry that is a lower paid industry and there's not a lot of organization within that industry, the ability to improve is much more difficult. And it's much more difficult take Walmart as an example.
Break time.
Yeah.
You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians. We'll be back momentarily following these announcements.
Exhibitors Carpet Service has changed their name to Carpet Warehouse at 4300 West Montrose Avenue in Chicago, and their new location at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood, Illinois, called Carpet of Highwood. Stop in and see Mike at Carpet Warehouse at 4300 West Montrose, 773-283-0100, or Brian Muir at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood. Call him at 847-266-1400. For carpets in your living room, dining room, bedroom, den, or family room, stop in at either location for a great deal. Once again, see Mike at Carpet Warehouse, 4300 West Montrose Avenue. Call him at 773-283-0100 in Chicago, or Carpet of Highwood at 440 Sheridan. Phone number at 847-266-1400. Remember, if you need a carpet for your living room, dining room, den, or family room, stop in and see Mike at 4300 West Montrose Avenue in Chicago. Call him at 773-283-0100 or Brian Muir at 440 Sheridan Road in Highwood, Illinois. Call him at 847-266-1400.
had something to say about our tax business we were talking about, and this is something I wondered many years ago.
We're building
Why is
in
it
Afghanistan. We should be
that
building
as
here.
you get older, I mean, you get higher in wages, that your tax amount not just goes up by what you're going to pay at that rate, but the rate goes up? I mean, it'll never affect me, but it doesn't seem to be fair even to the rich folks are always paying more to begin with. I mean, with that, when you have this graduated, just out, is that just must be a plot to take your money for no good reason. So anyway, we're trying to. Joe Muskel wanted to be. He must go on to see Mrs. Murphy. He'll be right back in a moment.
Here's something that we haven't touched on yet. There is a movement, and I think I don't know if they've had a vote in Congress or they're planning a vote in Congress about the right to work. And I believe someone might know the statistics better than I, but the number of states that are right to work states, I think it's 26. Am I right or wrong?
23 or 26. Yeah,
Right.
Well, we've got
right.
57 states, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the question. If that bill passes nationally, and this is probably more directed to Bill than anyone else because he seems more knowledgeable about it, is how does that affect the unions? For example, if the national right to work, or let's just say Illinois becomes a right to work state, what does that do to, let's say, the Fraternal Order of Police? Can someone become a Chicago police officer, not have to become a member of the FOP, and still benefit from all the negotiations? Do you know what you
Yeah,
think?
well, I think, first of all, let me just, this so-called right to work, they defined it as right to work, is a total misnomer. It doesn't create any rights and it doesn't create any work. So this so-called right to work, really it's right to work for less legislation. And this primarily is a provision in the federal law. When the National Labor Relations Act was passed in 1935, well, it didn't have that provision. And in 1947, the Landon-Griffin law was the Taft-Hartley Act was passed. And in the Taft-Hartley Act, they put a provision in the federal law called 14B. And 14B in the Taft-Hartley Act, and this happened in 1947, said a state can enact legislation that would prohibit mandatory union membership requirement, and that's where the so-called right to work issue comes up. They call it right to work. So, and actually there's a very serious problem with that, because states can enact legislation saying a company and a union cannot negotiate what we call a union security provision, which means if you go to work in a union shop, that the employer and the union can negotiate that you have to not be a member of the union. It's illegal to technically say be a member, but you have to pay your dues and initiation fee to the union. And in the public sector, a lot of them call it fair share. So what happens is this, that it's a very democratic process, because number one, in order for people to be able to organize and negotiate, by law, federal law, that it requires that 50%, a majority of people, 50% plus one, must decide and select a union. So that requires a majority either through a vote by the National Labor Relations Board, or through we call it a card check, where there's a written agreement, you want to have a union, majority of people sign for union representation, and then the employer can voluntarily recognize the union, and then the union becomes the bargaining agent. So then when the union becomes the bargaining agent, the union must then negotiate with the employer this union shop or union security provision that states as a condition of employment, after no less than 30 days, that person must pay their dues to the union. Now, a lot of provisions say must become a member of the union, but technically that's not the case. It's just paying dues. Now, if there were a national right to work law, that would mean that that an employer and a union could no longer negotiate that requirement. That would be voluntary as to whether or not people would become a member of the union. Now, the problem with that from the labor movement and the problem of democracy and rights is this, that the union has to go through a very democratic process to A, get the bargaining rights, B, negotiate that union security provision, which requires the support of the people, a majority, to get the employer to agree to that. So you have two processes that are democratic processes that establish that right. Now, regardless of whether or not whether you have a right to work state or what they call a non-right to work state, and I'll call them right to work for less states, that under the law, the union is required to negotiate provisions and everybody benefits. Not only is the union by law required to make sure that whether one's a member, not a member, and if it's a right to work state and they don't have to pay dues, they have the same rights and privileges, they get the same benefits, they get the same wage increases, and not only that, but if that individual, we talked about just cause, due process, if that individual who says, I'm not going to pay union dues, I'm not paying any dues at all, but if that individual gets unjustly fired, they can come to the union and say, you got to take up my complaint. And you know what? By law, the union has to take up that individual's complaint, process that complaint, spend legal fees and money representing that individual, while that individual say, well, I'm paying you a penny. Now, what's right about that? This is the problem with these people called these so-called right-to-work laws. Because, like I say, it reminds me, and this is how framing of issues become. You know, you hear this thing about pink slime with meat?
Yeah.
You know, the meat industry called this finely textured lean beef, and everybody bought into it and bought it, and then they did this investigation and said it was pink slime, and everybody said, I don't want pink slime.
Who created that word?
Yeah, they said, no, I don't want pink slime.
Vegetarians?
And then McDonald's stopped using the beef and everything because it was called pink slime. Well, it's the same framing of people. The anti-union forces like to call this right to work. It's totally misnamed, it's mislabeled, and because generally people will say, well, right to work, what's wrong with that?
I mean, kind of like gun control laws.
And if the employee, the non-union member, doesn't get representation, he can file a charge with the NLRB called an unfair labor practice against the union for failure to represent.
But to
And file a lawsuit.
And
but to delve into
lawsuit.
this just a little bit further, okay,
Yeah.
in the state of Illinois,
Right.
Union State, let's say you want to have your home rewired. So you call up a contractor and say, I want my home rewired. I want it done by a union electrician because I know that they have
Right.
a apprentice
Skills,
program, journeyman program, training.
Right.
In a right-to-work state, let's say I call up a contractor and I say, I want my home rewired. Okay, we'll send an electrician over.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it's not a union electrician, how do you know? Do they have the same training standards? Do they have apprentice programs? They're just not called union.
That'd depend, on where you are.
Yeah, well,
but listen, let me answer your question very shortly. You wanted to know about if somebody joins the FOP, and I would imagine it's the same as local too. You don't have to join the union. You don't have to pay union dues, but you do have to pay fair share. And that's usually about 3/4 of what the union dues. And you get everything in the contract. Because you are going, they are bargaining for you.
But here's the problem: if the state,
there's a lot of problems. A lot of those bastards won't even go for fair.
If the state became a right-to-work state, they wouldn't have to pay the fair share. They wouldn't have to pay that.
Yeah,
that's akin to right to work. So
Bill, even if it was in the contract,
even if it's in the contract,
the logic.
That ain't going to work.
Yeah, the logic.
Well, that's the problem.
And you know what? I'm going to call and find out if the right to work states do have that.
There's no mandatory requirement.
To my knowledge, there's no federal right to work law that's anywhere. I mean, someone may have introduced one, but its chances of being enacted are zero. It's never going to happen.
The legislation has been introduced. It hasn't been passed.
It's never going to. At the federal level, never.
Well, let me tell you.
Go ahead.
If the answer for me, the logic of the fair share closed shop laws is this: when they set up the law in the NLRB, you don't want a situation where the union, for instance, could bargain conditions less for you if you don't join. Right? We all agree with that. Nor would you want a law that would allow management to give special, better pay to the non-union.
Exactly.
So the only way that could work is that everybody gets the same level of benefits, whether a union member or not. then the logic of fair share becomes, well, if they have to, or closed shop, well, if the union has to represent, just like taxpayers get government, services, then they have to pay taxes, so they ought to be paying their fair share. That's the logic of the law. Now, in your case of the fires, you're covered by state law.
Yes.
So the state, all the public employees are not under NLRB, but they're under the state laws. There's various laws. So it would require to return to Illinois.
NLRB.
Wisconsin, Wisconsin.
Yeah, what happened in Wisconsin?
Wisconsin is now a right to work. It's not federal right to work, but they eliminated the fair share law for public employees. Now I think the law has just been overturned, Act 10. And,
Judge.
Yeah. So, but the point is, public employees are covered by state laws. If your state collective bargaining law, and some of them do and some of them don't. My brother teaches down in Florida. There's no fair share. It's a right to work for public employees. Okay, so you have different laws in different states covering public employees. Some laws say you can organize K-12. Some say you cannot organize higher ed. There's all different kinds of situations for public employees. But fair share, closed shop. All I'll say is this: the closed shop has always been a problem in the United States because people say, well, I should have a right to belong to any or not join any organization. So there's always been a lot of legal opposition and public opposition to that. Doesn't seem right. But at the same time, Americans also believe that you should pay your fair share. So I think the labor movement, if I was the master of the labor movement, and there's nobody like that exists, but if I could call the shots, I would stop using the term closed shop. I would not make it a requirement ever to join a union, but I would make it a requirement to pay their fair share.
Here.
Yeah,
and I think the American people would be happier with that.
There's a word, a four-letter word for that.
Yeah.
Can I?
We use.
When you
The
say
gentleman from County Clare, Joe Mescal here, he wanted to be recognized before. I recognize him, don't you?
Yeah, I
go
recognize
back
him.
to what Bill was talking about a while ago about giving his money to any derelict or somebody like that. We have 43 million people out of work in the United States of America. We got 57 million people drawing food stamps and WIC programs and everything else. Now, my question is, what is wrong with us and the whole country of waking up the Congressman of the United States of America, the Senate, and the President of the United States saying, Mr. President, let's get the hell down to work and get our shovels and start digging and get industry back to the United States of America where these 43 million people can get back to work and we won't have 47 million people on food stamps.
Is that a shovel-ready project?
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
I have two members of my family right now on food stamps, my brother and his son.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, wasn't that how years ago the WPA and all that got started? Let them
My dad was a
shovel our
WPA man.
streets and let them
No,
clean
you're
our
absolutely
buildings, and that's
No, the
I
CC
remember.
caps, the WPA.
My uncle and the CCCs, yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
why can't the United States Congress and the Senate and the President see
well,
what's
their
happening?
biggest
Wait,
problem
we got
is
to
they
do
can't get
something
along.
about
They
this.
can't get
Whomever
along.
the president may be.
We've got all kinds of
Yes.
crumbling infrastructure
Right.
that could really be
But
checked.
getting back to this right to work stuff, and these, again, the attack on labor is by those forces that are anti-union, and they feel if they can get these so-called right to work laws, whether they affect public employees on a state level or private sector workers on a federal level, it's all an effort to decrease and take away the strength of unions, because you're always going to have some people that are going to say, if I can get something for nothing, I'm going to get it. You got to represent me, but I don't have to pay union dues.
I'll do it.
I don't have to pay a fee to do that, a fair share. They're going to do that. And they know it's an effort to undermine the strength and the status of the labor movement. And it's the only area in which, by the way, anybody basically says that all of these people ought to be able to get a service and not pay anything.
Yeah, and what you have under the law, just so you know, under fair share, and this is really interesting because when I organize unions, we bargain first contract. If we get fair share in it, it's not guaranteed, you have to bargain it, but if you get fair share in it, the non-members then join, except they have a provision of law. You don't have to join, but pay your fair share. It's for IEA, it was always around 85%. It was less than any political action money and other stuff that didn't count. And you had to keep a close record of all the
of all the time and effort put in by staff working for the union, how much to justify, how much goes to representation. So it came out that 75, 85%, usually, let's say 80 on an average. So a fair share fee payer, they were called, paid 80% of the full dues. However, most of the if non-members would then join, because there's also union benefits you get, which easily make up the dues, discounts, all kinds of stuff, representation.
Picnic.
Yeah. So, but there is a conscientious objector status where the fair share fee would go into a pot if they objected. They have to legally object. There's a process. It's got to be posted in all the buildings and explained. But if you were a conscientious objector, and it had to be a legitimate religious, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Jehovah's Witness did not join the union and had to pay fair share. The union could not keep that money. It went into a pot and went to a legitimate charity, so that that person would not conscientiously would not be paying into something he doesn't religiously or object to.
Why don't Italians like Jehovah's Witnesses?
What?
Why don't Italians like Jehovah's Witnesses?
I have no idea.
They don't like any witnesses.
My wife's Italian. She'll take offense at that. Man.
I'd like to just Tom, you mentioned bulletin boards, and during our negotiations before for our first contract, we had meetings with the city, and one of the things brought up, we had one of the best labor attorneys in the city of Chicago. Not like that union buster Franzak, but not that I want to mention any names, but
I know who you mean.
He mentioned Dale brought up bulletin boards, and of course our guys are very, very upset about what's going on, and the big argument was on bulletin boards, union bulletin boards in firehouses and fire facilities and that. And one of our guys got up and he started screaming and he's jumping up and down on the table, going, every word you can think of, bulletin boards, bulletin board. But you know what? I'm looking at our attorney. Frank Moon was looking at me. I'm looking at our attorney, and the look on his face, and he just winked at me and says, "Come on, let's caucus, guys." We went in there. Dale went in and explained to these guys the importance of a bulletin board and the importance of getting the information out to the people.
Yeah.
You must have that bulletin board.
And the bulletin.
I went the next day before we even signed off on it, and I ordered bulletin boards for every firehouse in the city, and they are a very important.
I would venture to say that most union work sites have bulletin boards, not only with union material but with required federal postings, including fair share. Now, one other thing I want to point out, another part of the logic of this democratic union process is this: if you don't believe in unions and you don't like unions and you don't think you can't conscientiously object, because to be an objector, you have to have a pretty solid reason. That's why I mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses. They're always objecting. But if you don't object to religious grounds, but you don't like the union, you resent paying fair share, then you have a right to organize against the union, get a 51% non-union vote, and it's called decertification. Yeah. So it's a democratic process. But what a lot of people that say, I don't like unions, I don't like to have fair share, they're not going to raise their butts off that thing to do anything against it, because they, in back of their minds, even though they really not want that union, or they're too lazy to do anything about it.
We had three unions in Local 2 in the Chicago Fire Department. We had the engineers, we had the officers, and we had Local 2. And that was one of our big problems. Guys that, oh, God, I got promoted. I'm dumping Local 2, and I got to be an officer. And that a bunch of brown nosers. Exactly all they were. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The officers out there.
So we had them. Yeah. We had the engineers, which was an AFL-CIO. We had an Article 20 against them. It's the first time I did anything like that, and we decertified those guys.
Anyway,
and they all had to come in. You remember that?
Really?
Joe?
No.
Huh?
I remember that.
Oh yeah.
Well,
oh yeah.
When I
went out of business. In fact, when I started to research this thing back, I don't remember the dates now. It was at a convention. They had been decertified years ago, and they just came back.
Didn't tell you, huh?
Yeah, they just came back.
Yeah,
There's one more aspect to union. I just want to make this point very quickly. There's one more aspect. If somebody doesn't want any of their dues money going to political activities, there's a provision in the law, and it allows them to say, look, I want to pay just by the cost of representation, and the union has to make an adjustment. They call it Beck objective. Yeah. The union has to make an adjustment in what they pay in dues to deduct out anything the union may have spent for political activities.
Is that where COPE comes in?
So even that,
COPE?
Yeah, even that's protected
For members.
Yeah.
Even members can get their any political action money back.
And the other thing that you have to, there are other protections in the National Labor Relations Act that protect people. So this whole business about right to work is so misplaced and so wrong when you really drill down and look at what the facts are.
Well, that's like so many other things. There's misunderstood. The man sitting to my left here, Joe Mescal and myself and Bill Gibbons, we were originally in the original horse race when Jane Byrne called for a representation election. I call it a horse race because you had like 7 different participants. You had the Fraternal Order of Police, who eventually won the second round, Confederation of Police, who had just recently become part of the new International Union of Police Association, as the AFL-CIO, ourselves. We had the Chicago Patrolmen's Association. What else do we have there?
Crime Fighters Local 1. Yeah.
Oh no! He backed the Teamsters. Him with the Teamsters.
Yeah, combined counties.
Oh, they washed out. They didn't have enough. But anyway, and they had the no vote. No, they didn't have it. They had the what do you want to call it? Well, we had the no. They call it no single representation. The way they phrased it. Well, we lost in the first round, and we. Several years later, when the term was up, we went back to for like as you say, decertification, installation of a new bargaining agent. We tried for, and we lost to that one. However, these little, I want to, what's the word can I call them? These little goofs that come up and little wusses that say, "Well, I hear you won't be part of the collective bargaining anymore because you did that." I said, "No, I'll be part of it." I said, "The only reason they can disqualify me is on religious grounds or philosophical grounds, and obviously those are not mine because I was advocating another organization." I said, "The Fraternal Order of Police is just as stuck with me as I am with them." That's the way that went.
Yeah, on decertification, I think it should be clear to our listeners that you can switch unions through a process, an election process. In other words, if I want a union but I don't like this particular one, another union, although the AFL-CIO tries to prevent that, but that's possible.
They shouldn't try very hard when the Teamsters came back.
Well, no, Teamsters are no longer the AFL-CIO. Anyway, no, not Teamsters. They're out of the AFL-CIO.
Again?
Yeah. Anyway.
How long did that last?
They were they had changed to Win Coalition.
You can switch unions to one, and I've been involved in elections like that. But you can also go from union representation to decertify, so you have no union at all.
Right.
And that's where I was trying to make the. So you got to just be careful. I think for our listeners need to understand it. That you have. This is why I call it a very democratic process. When they wrote these laws, they looked at how a democracy in the workplace would look like.
It's interesting that the term right to work state is kind of ambiguous and confusing. It can be very much just the same way as prohibition was supposed to promote sobriety in the nation. And what do we have? Organized crime. And gun control does the direct opposite, because who obeys gun control laws? Well, law-abiding citizens, right? Yeah. Not the bad guys. They don't care. They're always out with the pistols.
And where's all the work going now?
What?
It's all going to the right-to-work state.
Yeah. Well, remember when Blagojevich came in? He said he wouldn't raise taxes, but all these fees were raised.
Yeah.
I heard a guy calling on one of the talk shows. I've got a trucking company. We're on wheels. I can go to Wisconsin, Iowa, Kentucky, Indiana, like that. Where do you want?
Again, I think with right to work, you have to keep in mind that even if you have a right to work, so-called right to work for less state, that the union represents everybody in what the bargaining unit is. And in view of the bargaining unit, and whether somebody's a member or not a member, they're all represented. So the only thing that the so-called legislation does is weaken the revenue coming in. The union still represents all those people, even in the right to work state. So, and matter of fact, we years ago, the paper workers union, we represented a lot of paper mills throughout the South, and they were so-called right to work states. But those people realized the importance of their union, and that collective bargaining means we're all collectively together to bargain, and we maintain a 90 to 98% membership because they said we want the strength of our union. We know what they're trying to do to us, and we're going to be together.
Back in 1985, there was an effort in Missouri which to vote to pass the right to work law, and then the unions really got together and they eventually defeated the effort. But what they found out is a lot of the union members thought right to work meant you had a right to a job. You're guaranteed a job.
Yeah.
So I think there's some very cleverly thought out nomenclature here to get people to.
Joe and Jack, you mentioned the 7 different units that tried to represent that, and that was brought up to us in one of our negotiations, and a very dear friend of yours and mine called Moon said, he says, I can settle that whole thing. He says, all them guys carry guns. Just put them in a room and whoever comes out. But I do want to say this. Which was a typical Moonism, which I think is what this gal that
Gonna wrap it up here.
The teacher's strike. I think she's the same cut of cloth.
But there's only, and I don't want to get political, but there is a political organization that supports the national right to work law on their platform.
Gee, I wonder who that might
Okay.
be.
There's also one where the first lady said her father only made $55,000 in the 1970s. Should be about $250,000 today.
And if I could, to just wrap it up where I started off.
Let's not get political.
This is not and should not be an us against them. This should be all of us in this together.
Exactly.
If we talk about our country, getting our country back on top, don't let people turn us against one another. Unions are not the enemy.
Last word, John.
You said that America is not the greatest country in the world. I believe America remains the greatest country in the world, but even the greatest country in the world can be badly managed, badly governed, badly led. I'm sure we would disagree as to where the bad management comes from, but I think we can agree that the nation is still the greatest nation. It's just been badly governed, badly administered.
I'll agree to that. We got to wrap it up with that. I want to thank everyone for coming down today. And we had a late comer here, Rich Lang. Shh. He came in. He said, "Be quiet. You want to just observe today." Bill Gibbons, return bout. He'll come back sometime, Bill.
Thank you.
Jeanette Frontier.
Definitely. Great.
Our answer to Mary Hartline.
Mary Hartline.
Mary Hartline. Ask your grandparents. Mary Hartline was kids. And Tom Serber. I got it right that time, right? Serber.
That's good.
Serber. John Koshelko. Bill King Kong Kugelman. Tom McKenna. Joe Mescal. Ken Little standing behind me eating cookie. Ken Little behind me, and myself. And next time we're going to be taping on the October 15th. And I don't know the subject. What do you think about talking about just the presidency period since we'll have an election coming up? Okay?
Good deal.
Is that a good one? President, got a lot to talk about. We also got all those presidents of the Articles of Confederation everyone hears about, right?
Oh, gosh.
So,
John,
until next time, remember, you can pick us up on those stations. And remember, folks, history is much more than a book you keep on the shelf.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and so have we.
Yeah.